Good evening. I call the June 13th, 2022 school board meeting to order. It is 7:02 p.m. We are in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Newman, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Fraley?
Here.
Dr. Hoy?
Here.
Dr. Jessefanger?
Excused.
Excused.
Mr. Meyer?
Here.
Mr. Phillips?
Present.
Ms. Neufeld?
Here. Thank you. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals please limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of our agenda for the board to enter into a debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Is there any community comment? I don't see any in the room. Mr. Price?
Yeah, we have one hand raised. Deb Falk-Palak, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Hi, good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to congratulate all of our students who graduated this past weekend. I have no doubt they are going to go out and each and every one of them, whatever path they choose in life, will do well. I wanted to give a little feedback for consideration regarding the graduation ceremony itself and accessibility. So I was pleased to see that there was ramping to the stage done. And what I'd like to suggest, and using the quote of one of the administrators at the ceremony who said, "The future can be better than the present," and I have the power to make it so, if we could look at the future and providing, educators are familiar with the concept of universal design for learning in the built environment. When we look at universal design, we look at ways that all people can access the environment. So I'd like to ask, and really for us to seriously consider this, is that we use universal design with setting up the stage so that all students, regardless of ability or disability, can enter and exit and have an equitable experience with going across the stage, so that everybody, if everybody is coming off the stage in the center of the stage, instead of steps there, could we have a ramp there? And so that we don't have any kids having to exit the side or the back because of disability, but that everybody can have the same experience during graduation of coming onto the stage and exiting it in the same fashion. So that's my comment, and I sincerely hope that if we rent ramping, I don't know if the district owns ramping or if we rent it, but if this can be looked at, there's certainly, we're 32 years into the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's certainly a lot of examples on how stages are set up to provide that universal access for everyone. And I'd be happy to share more information, but hopefully this could be a very easy fix for going forward with graduations. And once again, congratulations to our 2020 grads.
Thank you for your comment. Is there any other public comment on non-agenda items?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Then let's move on to superintendent's reports. Dr. Means.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members, community members. I have a few items I would just like to give you an update on. The first is graduation. This past Saturday, we had 294 graduates from Tulsa East and 245 graduates from Tulsa West make that big step in their lives and graduate from our high schools. We had a total of 16 valedictorians at Tulsa East and 7 at Tulsa West and 1 salutatorian for each high school. So that's quite impressive. I want to thank Sharon and Mike and Jenny and Leanne for being present for the ceremony. I think it's always special for board members to have the ability to distribute the diplomas. It was very, very nice. I think we've mentioned in passing, I've mentioned in passing with some of our board members that Tulsa East has really been debating where their future graduations may take place. I think they're landing as a school administrative team, they're landing on staying at Tulsa West. We've been debating on going either to Hart Park or other places. They did note to me that they may need financial help in razzing the environment, so it's a little bit more red than green during the graduation ceremony. But other than that, it's I think it's been a very good home for Tulsa East. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there was a very emotional moment at our Tulsa West graduation when one of the students who was battling a health situation was given the honor and the privilege by our Tulsa West administration to declare the students graduates by having them move their tassels. He also had an opportunity to thank the Tulsa West community for rallying around him and his family. So I thought that was, for me, that was quintessential Tulsa, that we were about people first. And then the last thing I would just share with you, because one of the commencement speakers, student speakers, said that traditionally we have these themes at these graduations. I just want to share the themes that I shared. At Tulsa East, I talked about turning chapters, very traditional theme of moving on to another chapter. And at Tulsa West, I really talked about the opportunity to be positive and to ignore the noise and to remain positive and uplifting and to do good things for people moving forward. And I want to share that in this boardroom this evening because not only did our students, almost 540 of those students and their families celebrate graduation on Saturday, but it's also a combination of a job well done by this board and this faculty and community by closing out another school year. And if we can also, I know I'm looking forward to turning to the next chapter and remaining positive and uplifting our kids in the right place. So I know for me, it wasn't just a graduation statement, but it was something that I want to live by as we go into the next school year. So that's graduation.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer.
I just need to comment that the student speakers were extraordinary and compelling. And it was a privilege for me to be able to listen to them and hear what they had to say. I'm sure everybody would agree. The final speech that you referenced, the closing, was very compelling. The other students who spoke as well. It really was like a fine statement of who our kids are, that we got to hear those things they all had to say. So thank you to the graduates.
Is there any other comment? We'd like to move on to the strategic planning update.
Yes. Really excited to share with the board and the community that we're down to our final 2 sessions with the steering committee. They will meet tomorrow night and also on the 21st. They're making great progress. These next 2 meetings, the steering committee will finalize their actionable goal statement for each of their areas. Just for review, there are 5. This is a test for me as well. There's 5 areas. There's academic performance. There's diversity and inclusion. It is social, emotional, and mental health, high quality staff, and community and culture. Those are the 5 areas that we have really landed on based on survey data, and listening session, so quantitative and qualitative data. The steering committee, they're charged with creating actionable goal statements and also strategic objectives. And then they will turn it over to you. They've also refined and have a draft modified mission statement and core beliefs that they would like to share with you. The board, through polling last week, indicated that August 1st and August 17th were available dates for everyone to come together. So it's our goal to refine that work between the 21st, or really the 22nd of June to August 1st, or maybe even before, so then you can refine and finalize the strategic planning documents. It's our goal to present that document to you for final approval in August, hopefully to August 22nd. We're also identifying, if I may, Madam Chair, we're also identifying the August 1st and August 17th date because the final date for submitting an application to fill the seat 7 vacancy is next week, Monday, June 20th. We're hoping that whoever's watching and considering putting in an application for that vacancy will mark their calendars now for August 1st and August 17th. But again, just for community awareness of the deadline for submitting an application for that vacancy will be next week, Monday.
Quick question, please.
Yes.
Please don't name any names, but that said, have we had applications submitted already?
It's my understanding we have one application. Is that right, Steve?
Mm-hmm.
One application is in.
Okay, and what again are the hours that somebody could deliver them if they're delivering in person?
They have until our hours. No, thank you for that,
Yeah.
Mr. Meyer, because our hours at the district office have they change in the summer. So we work 9-hour days Monday through Thursday, so 7 to 4, and then on Friday it's from 7 to 11 a.m. on Fridays. But if someone would like to turn in their application, there's someone here in the district office from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Thursday. It's 7 to 11 on Fridays. I have good news. And the good news is that, and it's rare for us to talk about this in this way, but the district was notified a few weeks ago that through our ESSER funding, the state of Wisconsin will provide an additional $1.2 million to the Wauwatosa School District. I think this will impact the presentation that you'll hear later this evening from our CFO, Mr. Brightman. But we're really excited about the fact that we're able to gain additional funds. The reason why we're receiving an additional $1.2 million is because the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction has applied a formula. And if a school district doesn't meet a certain threshold with that formula, they, being DPI, have determined that those school districts deserve more money. We did not meet that threshold in terms of the initial funds that were distributed to us. So they're giving us an additional $1.2 million. This is really, really helpful. Mr. Brightman will talk about the fact that we have a lot of, you have options as a governing board, because right now we've presented to you a balanced budget. So that additional $1.2 million could go toward closing the potential shortfall we may have for the 23-24 school year budget, or you may utilize it for the 22-23 school year budget, depending on where you would like to direct those funds. So that's good news. It's always good for you to know that as a governing board, you have resources at your disposal. And then finally, I would encourage the community to come out and chat with me, but more importantly, I want to listen to community members. I'm holding some listening sessions this week and next week around the issue of discipline. The dates are June 15th and June 20th. I want to hear from community members, staff members, if they're available, some of the important components of school safety for them. At the same time, we have a draft document, a behavioral matrix, if you will, that explains what are behavioral infractions and how we would discipline them in the future, and how we would levy discipline. I think it's really important for us to go into next school year, turning the chapter, going to a new chapter and making sure that we're very explicit about what are the expectations. In this document, it's not just about discipline. I've really tried to ground us in some research, and there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. George Baer, who has done a lot of work around school discipline. And he talks about the fact that we have in schools, we have to really apply a balanced approach. And that schools sometimes give mixed messages. At times we use the word discipline to signify punishment. But we also use the word school discipline to signify that we want to teach students that they have to self-discipline themselves and have to self-regulate themselves. And so in this matrix, we really take a deliberate approach in ensuring that there's balance, that we're very clear about what the consequences are if you violate our code of conduct, but also what are the support systems in place to ensure that when you make a mistake, that we're going to be there to restore you and to make sure that you feel welcome back into the school environment. I used to always say as a school administrator, there are no bad students. There are students who make poor decisions every once in a while, but it's our opportunity to teach them that that's not a pattern that they have to continue. And so this disciplinary framework that I want to discuss and collaborate with community members around not only lays out the consequences in a very clear way, but also lays out our resources around social, emotional, and mental health. It lays out opportunities for us to restore students through restorative circles and having the opportunity to discuss how they have violated the rules and how they hurt the school community, and how the school community will be there to support them to make better decisions in the future. That feels more like a comprehensive approach to school safety and school discipline that we are intending to implement for next year. So again, please join me for those listening sessions on June 15th and the 20th. That's the conclusion of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
My personal preference, instead, I don't believe in euphemisms, but I really do believe this. I think behavior management or modification is probably more useful to me than discipline. And please, everyone, I also want to note that a student who is having behavioral issues isn't having as many opportunities to learn as a student who is not having behavioral challenges. And so if we can, improve this behavioral challenge that we have, we might have more opportunities to teach, and the students might have more opportunities to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other board comments on the superintendent's reports before we go on to the next item? Thank you. I just would like to say again, congratulations to the students and the families. It was a wonderful celebration. And good luck to all of you in your next steps. We are also looking forward to strategic planning. Please, if you are interested in serving on the board, the applications for the seat 7 vacancy are due Monday, a week from today, June 20th. And again, please stop by the office with the paperwork or call and receive some additional information from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Fridays. And And also that we have been hearing a lot from the community on safety. In addition, we have had some comments during our ribbon cutting open house events. And so we're going to be reviewing and taking a refresh on our the entirety of our safety plans. So that's the next topic up. So we'll move on to our school board report and the school safety resolution. And I will tag team this with Dr. Means.
Sure.
In your board packets, you've received a copy of the resolution, and I don't know that it's necessary to read that in full this evening, but I will ask Dr. Means if he has any other comments before we open it up for discussion.
For those following us online, if you open the resolution, I think there's just a few items that I would like to point out to the community. The first is the first line, which is we believe that evidence-based intervention strategies in the area of social, emotional, mental health is critical. I would direct your attention also to it's actually the last whereas, where we as a school district would ask that community members, staff members, if this work is very important to you, one of my recommendations to the Legislative Advocacy Committee will be that we become very diligent as a community in expressing to the state legislature that positions like social workers, counselors, crisis assessment team members, school resource officers, those positions, if they could be funded outside of the revenue limit, that's millions of dollars. And what's happening in schools right now is that we're making these decisions and choices of not fully funding or appropriately funding these positions because of financial concerns. If these positions were outside of the revenue limit, we wouldn't have that challenge and that squeeze that is happening to public schools. So those are just a few items. I think it's really important. There's just a lot of different things in this resolution, ranging from the Speak Up, Speak Out program that we have and making sure that we're very diligent around it to obviously, and I'll conclude on this note, Madam Chair, the fact that gun safety is important to our society. We have to continue to be a voice for this issue as well. So just a few highlights to the resolution.
Thank you, Dr. Means. Is there any board comment or discussion? Dr. Hoyt?
I just want to say that I'm really excited to see this. It's obviously a starting place, not a finishing place. But I do think that the Be Smart program and Speak Up, Speak Out are both great programs, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them in action next year.
Ms. Fraley?
I appreciate the specificity and the brevity and just how straightforward this resolution is. I think sometimes we've put forth resolutions in the past that have been so many whereas you sort of get lost. So thank you for that, for whomever put this together. I had one question on the second page. Let it be further resolved that the Wauwatosa School District Board of Ed and the superintendent will meet annually with the leaders of the PTA Council. I was really excited to see the community engagement there. My only question is given how hard it's been for us to all 7 find dates, is it that we're committing the full board to meeting with the PTA or representatives from the the school board, just so that we're not over promising and under delivering. Because I absolutely love the idea. I just want to make sure that we fulfill whatever obligation or commitment we make within this resolution. And then my only other question was, so PTA council, yes, is there anybody else that we should be meeting or hearing from specific to this particular topic? And again, just not having the context for, I know the PTA council brought one of these ideas, but is there anybody else that as we're thinking about this, we think would be an important community voice to hear from?
Thank you. Mr. Meyer?
Regarding board availability, 18 years ago, it was much easier to get the full board to a meeting. And that started to change maybe 10 years ago. And I don't know why that is, but some of that is on the board. That said, as we manage ourselves, and to me, this is sort of the role of the president, to the person calling the meetings to form a judgment as to whether we really have to have 7 board members there, or whether we could have 5 or 6 or 4 or 5 or 6 and still not stop progress. I know when I was president and setting the agenda, I never wanted to have a roll call that I thought would be affected by the absence of a particular board member. If I wasn't sure about an issue, how it would go. Not that I asked people, but sometimes usually we're 7 or nothing, 6-1, whatever. But sometimes it's close, and you really know you have to have all 7 board members there to really express the will of the board. So that's kind of, to me, up to the president about whether we call these meetings without everyone there. Mm-hmm. I do hate to see progress stopped on everything because it's so hard to get 7 board members together.
Thank you. Are there any other additions or other discussion topics that you may not see in the resolution? No? So as far as creating the resolution, Dr. Means, maybe you would like to preface that a little bit just for the community. And certainly we've had a lot of community input and our own experience, as well as many of the factors that we've had throughout the country over the last several months.
I took the privilege of crafting this first draft based on your feedback through individual conversations I've had with many board members and your concerns about school safety, and also the leadership from our PTA council and the words and the concerns that they wanted expressed as well. So it was more of an opportunity to synthesize all the different feedback. I think that's part of my role, is to be a good listener, to make sure that the expressed concerns of the community and the governing board is expressed. So that's how we arrived at the content that's in front of you.
Great. Thank you. So as far as other possible groups to meet with or a structure, do we have ideas for that?
Not at this time. I'm still contemplating what does next year look like, and there seems to be a desire from some parents just to have the ability to meet on a quarterly basis around this topic. So that may become an ad hoc group that I would chair. I haven't given it the full review yet, and haven't had a chance to talk to others about it, but that could become another standing parental committee that either a representative group of board members or the full board could engage as well.
Agreed. And I don't know if you have been approached, but I know Dr. Means and I were approached at one of the open houses by parents who really would like to stay involved and contribute in any way they possibly could. And so we are taking that seriously and creating a way for that participation to be valuable and meaningful. As far as the full board meeting with the PTA Council, that is something that we certainly can calendar and agenda well in advance, given the structures of the PTA. And this was a point actually in drafting the resolution that I clarified, because I wanted to make sure that the PTA Council covered all of our parent-teacher organizations. And because we have multiple, we have PTOs, we have PTAs, we have another designation, which I learned about at that time. And but that is an all-encompassing group of the parent-teacher organizations in our school district. So definitely that is something that can be scheduled well in advance, and the PTAs have a regular set of meetings. They're very structured. And if any of you have a chance to go to some of them within the district, it's very helpful to see how they're doing, to hear some of the challenges that they have, and so we can move forward with that. Just one question that I have is the last sentence of this resolution, where it seems a little bit open-ended, where we're saying, and of all state and federal laws concerning guns. And I don't think that's what we meant there. And I think we should clarify that.
Maybe gun safety, all state and federal laws concerning gun safety or gun regulation, maybe regulations of it.
Right. I mean, yes, because state and federal laws could be developed that we would not agree to. So it just seems that, I mean, I think it's given, but of course we don't want to leave anything for interpretation and assuming. Okay.
Can I
Yes.
I really liked your idea, Ms. Fraley, about working with other community organizations and sort of having an opportunity to meet with them, which might be through these, like quarterly parent meeting, or maybe through the safety committee that already exists. But I think there are, particularly in Milwaukee County, there are a lot of resources around that are youth focused around gun violence and impact of that. And I think that could be a fantastic community resource for us to tap.
So can we add language there at that? Or is this going to just be an administrative takeaway, a board takeaway, that we make sure we are following up on that topic?
We'll follow up on the topic, because right now there isn't any group to connect to officially yet.
Okay.
May I?
Yes, Mr. Meyer.
I'm a little uncomfortable with the word fierce. I'm not quite sure why. Is there another word that would show our resolve and determination and commitment? That I like fierce, but I'm just throwing it out there. Is that the word we want? I could go with it, but I'm just wondering if there's a better word than fierce.
We have used strong language in our other resolutions.
Okay, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just throwing it out. Okay, I'll support
regarding
it.
weapons specifically.
I'll support. It seems that weapons are fierce, and therefore our opposition to weapons should be, something counter to fierce. So, but yet resolve and steadfast and determined and resolute and all that good stuff. But that's okay. I'm fine.
Unwavering.
I'd leave it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the discussion on this very important topic. We also have a community comment section. So I'd like to open it up for community comment on the school board report. Is there anyone in the room? And please state your name and address.
Sure. My name is Kelly Goldman. My address is 1846 North 71st Street. I just want to thank you all for being so open to all the items in this resolution. I'm one of the parents who brought forth the Be Smart program, which I think is a really tangible way that our school community and our parents can come together to reduce the risk of gun violence in our community. And I want you all to know that it's a cutting edge thing. I'm involved with the program, and I know that other parents in districts, even here in southeast of Wisconsin, are being met with resistance from school boards when they're trying to bring this to their communities. There's only 2 school districts in the state of Wisconsin who are sharing this information with their communities. But I appreciate the fact that you guys have been open to this and the quick action that you've taken. I think it was really helpful for a lot of parents who felt helpless and hopeless after recent community and school violence to see that there are tangible steps that we can take and partner with the school district to help make our community safer around gun violence. So I would just encourage you all, as you consider your vote on this at the next meeting, to please be supportive and know that there are a lot of parents in the district who want to share this responsibility. We know that there's only so much that teachers and administrators can do once kids are in the building, but there's a lot that we can also do in our homes, in our community, to decrease gun violence and the risks of weapons in schools. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, John Etter, 2733 North 73rd Street, and during the school year, room 264 East High. I just completed my 25th year in the classroom this year, and thinking back during my 2nd year of teaching was when the Columbine massacre occurred. Since then, we have seen Sandy Hook, we have seen Marjory Stoneman, and most recently Uvalde. And fortunately, it looks like Congress is finally taking some important half measures to address the pandemic of gun violence. We're dealing with another pandemic right now, but they are only half measures. And I think until until we have people in Congress who are willing to stand up to the gun lobby and put the lives of their fellow Americans, especially our children, above the most extreme, permissive, and frankly irresponsible and dangerous readings of the Second Amendment, I think it's important for the rest of us to do what we can to pick up the slack and do what we can to especially look after our children. So I really applaud this resolution and urge the school board to adopt it at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other in the room, then again, we will be voting on this topic at our June 27th meeting. And if you do have comment between now and then, please reach out to any board members, the administration, or via our email. And with that, I'd like to move on to the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Hoy. We have. Is there any comment or discussion on the consent agenda? Thank you, Ms. Fraley.
Two requests. Dr. Means, I know Ms. Foch is not here tonight. If you could just ensure that any of the staff who are leaving the district are receiving the exit survey. I want to make sure we see that data. And then my common request is, can we at the quarterly mark see the retention data just so we can see where we're comparing this year to previous years, and ideally how we're doing against other districts as well. I know that this is a nationwide issue, but still when I see, resignations, it stops my heart a little bit. So I'd like us to be ensuring we're using data to assess, where we are. And I'll just say I'm also really excited to see the staff that we're bringing in, seeing some names that are exciting. And so just a little more data.
I asked Ms. Foch to have a retention report at our June 27th meeting, so that'll be prepared. Anticipated that there will be a request.
You knew it would be my question, so.
Anticipated the request, and yes, we're being very diligent about getting the exit survey information.
Great, thank you.
Is there any other board discussion? Yes, Mr.
One
Meyer.
question. It's a little bit late, but it's applicable to any topic, I think. When we choose the new board member, will they be sworn in right away? They will be seated that night, and any of these things we're talking about here that we're going to vote, whether it's, one of the, who knows, wherever you agenda the roll call that night, whatever is on the agenda, whomever is applying needs to be ready to do the job short minutes later. Okay,
Yes.
just put that out there.
In a preliminary conversation with Ms. Buenfeld, the plan is for you to have the interview process at 5:30, between 5:30 and hopefully 7:30-ish on the 27th. Number 2, if you look at the agenda right now, number 2 would be the swearing in of that new board member. So number 1 would be the meeting opening, roll call, public comment on non-agenda items. Number 2 would be then the oath of office for that new person.
Okay, so any of these topics where we say we're voting
Number
next
3 is consent
meeting,
agenda. So welcome to the board.
ears open,
Yes,
be
sir.
ready. Your name will be called in the roll.
Including passing the budget.
Yes.
June 27th would be
Okay.
final approval of the preliminary budget.
Ms. Fraley.
So can we then, once the 20th closes and we have all applicants, can they please receive a communication that lets them know that with the expectation that if you're showing up Monday to participate in this process, that you will have watched the previous 2 board meetings and will be prepared to make a vote with your name that you can feel good about?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and at that time, we will already have a preliminary draft agenda.
Yep.
So, perfect. Yeah, so that is one other topic. We are trying to plan our regular meetings much farther in advance for not only board, review and hopefully then posting sooner to the community. So, but yes, we can operationalize that. Any other discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there any community comment on the consent agenda? I don't see any in the room. Is there any online?
Yeah, we have a couple of attendees with hands raised. Kendra Kovar, you have the mic. Please state your name and address.
Yes, this is Kendra Kovar. My address is 2405 Merlin Way, Brookfield. I teach at Whitman Middle School, and my comment also relates to the consent agenda. Thank you, Ms. Fraley, for the concerns you expressed. I have some similar. I'm concerned about the number of resignations. Additionally, it's important to know that teaching contracts are not due until Wednesday, June 15th, so it's likely that more resignations can be anticipated. As of June 10th, the last day of school, I know of 16 resignations alone from Whitman during the school year and at the end of the school year. Please note that some of those resignations will appear on future consent agendas. It's my hope that the district is conducting the interviews, but also analyzing that data very carefully as to the reasons why people are leaving, in hopes that plans can be made by the district to find ways to retain our extremely talented staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Deb Falk-Palak. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Thank you. Deb Falk-Palak, 7435 West Wells. I am happy to see the raises that are going to be given to some of our special education teachers. We absolutely cannot afford to lose. We can't afford to lose any teachers, but we can't afford to lose these teachers. There is one person that before you vote, I noticed they resigned, but then you're being asked to vote on a raise for them for next year. I'm hoping that this person, because we had this teacher, she was excellent, and I'm hoping that maybe she changed her mind and it's an error on the consent agenda. But I thought I would point that out, and I'm certainly hoping that instead she's staying.
Thank you for that comment.
We have no more hands raised.
Okay, that concludes public comment then online. Dr. Means, did you have a comment?
I do not.
Okay. Does any board member see any reason to delay or change the vote for the consent agenda at this point based on that comment?
Can't find the duplicate name.
Yeah, I don't see.
I'm going back and forth. Do you see it? Do you know?
I can see it.
It's Tomasino.
My recommendation to the board would be if you need to table that one person's name, you may do so. But I would not hold up the entire consent agenda for one name. Without HR being here this evening to clarify why it's duplicated, I can't speak to that issue.
Board members?
It's my understanding through technology, this person is resigning. This person is leaving the district. Okay. So while there has been an offer for a salary increase, they are leaving. Okay. The plan is for the person to leave.
Yeah. So
yes, Mr. Meyer.
If we leave the offer out there, who knows? Is that right? Is that bad?
It's not bad.
Okay.
Just leave it all as it is.
Just let it
ride.
Let it. Okay. So I know back in my early days of my life, a wonderful teacher resigned and changed their mind. And does that ever happen?
Yes, that happens quite often, actually.
So it could happen. Who knows? Let's just let it.
Keep that release up.
Okay.
Okay, so seeing none, no additional changes, and we're very pleased and we're hopeful. I'd like to take the roll call then, Ms. Newman.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Hoig?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld?
Yes. Okay, thank you. Our next topic is the business service presentation of the proposed 2022-2023 budget. And
as Mr. Brightman's getting settled for the board and community members, Mr. Keith Brightman is in day 13 of his job. He has been transitioning, but he started with this on June 1st. He is our new chief financial officer. He's really had an opportunity to get a good handle on our budget. Was really pleased and just kind of cross over again. Our strategic planning steering committee received this same presentation from Mr. Brightman last week. So they have a firm understanding of the financial health of the district as well. So We're pleased to present this information to you. I may, as we're continuing to stretch, I'll give you one highlight to this presentation because I know it's been a community conversation, and that is the number of open enrollment students that are anticipated in this budget. It is our plan and our goal to keep our open enrollment numbers flat. And right now we have a total of 1,322, or is it 20? 320. I keep wanting to make it 22. But it's 1,320 open enrollment students in our district for this past school year. Of the 1,320 open enrollment students, 140 were graduating seniors. So they were young people who graduated this past Saturday. There's also something in our state law called tuition waiver students. A tuition waiver student is someone who started the school year living in the city of Wauwatosa. And for whatever reason, their family has decided to move outside of Wauwatosa. We call those students tuition waiver students. They're technically open enrollment students. We know we have currently right now 60 of those students who were at the beginning of last school year, they were residents. They have now become open enrollment students. And so what we have to do is look at our available seats and try to keep the number as close to 100. I think I was a social studies teacher, but I think that the number that we want to try to stay close to is somewhere between 85 and 90 students. So we're not grossly above that 140 threshold to stay flat. The reason why we can't go straight 140 students, which I think would be another 80. So the 60 tuition waiver plus the 80, we can't use that number because we do know that there will be some decline in resident enrollment. There will be some students who will not take their open enrollment seats. So our goal is to have about 150 open enrollment students who are new between the tuition waiver and the new seats. That's our goal. But I wanted to kind of, and maybe I stretched too long now, I stole your thunder, but I wanted to answer that question right away because I think that's been a question in the community of how many open enrollment students are projected in this preliminary budget. And our goal is to present to you to stay flat at 1,320 open enrollment students.
So may I comment?
Yes.
So historically, the past superintendent, Dr. Ertl, had said to me that, and I speak to this not as a pro, for or against open enrollment, but it is a topic now with budgetary relevance, that 1,300 was about as many as Wauwatosa can manage for a number of open enrollment students, considering the size of our district. Now, there's a lot of specifics that would go into that conclusion that we're not agenda to talk about tonight, but for financial planning purposes, that was the thought based on experience gained as we ramped up the number of open enrollment students, that when we hit 1,300 for various reasons, we didn't want to go past that. And I don't think 1,320 is essentially past 1,300, who cares? A couple dozen kids. We care about them as kids, but as a number, it's not that important. But with respect to budgetary planning, if we were to go above that 1,300 area, that's more than a change in number. It's a qualitative change in how we operate, maybe, and that it should be brought to the board for full discussion if we want to go past that general number. Thank you.
Please, thank you for the introduction, and I do want to thank Mr. Meyer, Mr. Phillips, for visiting me last week, and a nice introduction to yourselves to some of your priorities for the district. I'd like to also reach out to the other board members and over the course of the summer, meet with each of you independently and get to know you a little bit also and some of your priorities. So I look forward to that as we look at that. So For tonight, we're going through the budget discussion. Following my presentation, we'll have a chance for a budget hearing, we call it. It's a chance for the community, the board, to ask questions on the budget. We'll do our best to answer the questions tonight. If we can't do that, we'll do an FAQ to respond prior to the next board meeting and at the next board meeting prior to asking for approval from the full board. So as Dr. Bean said, I'm on June 13th, 13 days into the system, and so far very impressed. I have to say, meeting with the strategic planning committee last week, just the level of knowledge in that group on the school finance lens and how it relates to what we actually do to serve kids was impressive to me, just like the board meeting last time at the end of May when I attended. So just impressed with the demeanor and the questions that come up through the board and community process so far. There are 2 attachments in board docs that you can review. One of them is the sheet full of numbers, and that's the budget summary. That's the DPI state legal format to approve the budget. So I won't spend a lot of time on that tonight. That's just there to let you see the numbers as they're framed in legal purposes for approval at the June 27th meeting. Where all focus tonight is in the presentation slides you can see on the screen. We'll be going through and looking at the start to looking at a budget process and a budget calendar, and just really looking at a snapshot of what happens between tonight and the end of this year's budget planning process. I'll get to that slide in a second. We'll look again at the enrollment versus membership conversation that was started at the last meeting and touch on that again. We'll look at revenues, expenditures. We'll look at the expected tax levy, projected tax levy, the tax rate. We'll look at a summary of the other funds, and then talk about some requested board action and some advocacy things that we'll be talking about, longer term thinking as we approach the next state biennial budget and resources that we need for things like Dr. Means mentioned earlier in the meeting. So it's kind of how we're organized tonight. The budget calendar. So what you're not seeing is this is the final maybe quarter or third of a full budget calendar. The process starts back in December and January with setting really a tone for what we expect to see as far as resources from one year to the next for the system, doing some projections on enrollments, doing a deeper dive in resident enrollment as well as open enrollment students, non-resident students that may be in the system and maybe plan to be in the system. So what you're seeing now again starts tonight and takes us through the budget adoption, which happens the second meeting in October. We get the final parameters to approve that budget on October 15th. So the second meeting in October is when the board certifies the original budget, it's called, and then we certify tax levies and get those things out to the municipal clerks after that point. So that's the remaining portion on here. The 2 yellow highlighted items are where we're going to request board action. And so that'll be on the 27th for action on the preliminary budget, and then on October 24th for adoption of the original budget. So those are the 2 key steps for board action. Where you see the kind of salmon or pink shaded areas, that's where we turn our assumptions into reality. We'll then know our third Friday count, the number of students we're actually serving, which feed the budget process. We'll have some state parameters that come out. The certified general aid comes out from the state on October 15th, as well as equalized property valuations that then factor into an actual tax rate. So tonight we're talking about a lot of projections yet, and that'll be the case through October 15th and through October and that last board meeting. Any questions on that so far? Okay, looking again at the enrollment versus membership, and it's just key for the board to have in your mind that they're just not the same. They're not equal. The enrollment is the number of students that we serve and how we staff, how we need facilities. The membership side is simply a revenue index, and it's a conversion of all resident students, whether they attend Wauwatosa schools or not, into a factor that then resonates into how much revenue authority we have. So again, they're not equal, 2 different purposes. When we start to look at benchmarking different cost structures, usually that factors in the enrollment side into the number of students we have in the schools divided by number of staff or staff costs or whatever the case is. So we'll have to make sure we're clear on what those differences are as we start to look at that type of benchmarking. Again, any questions on that piece? As we look at the enrollments, and so that, again, this is the number of students that are in our school buildings, the number of teachers that we staff towards those students. We mentioned last time in the 2021 school year, we had the drop of the 366 students, and that was very typical across the state and across the area. Seeing between 5 to 8%, sometimes more, of your student population kind of leave for that school year. No one knew at that point if they would rebound the next year or 2 years in. We haven't seen that, neither has anybody else that I've talked to. So this could be the year where we start to see more of those students re-enter the system, but we'll find out again as we get closer to that September count. Is we're looking for the 21-22 year, our actual increase was 18 students up, and that drop of 366. And then we're projecting a slight drop again for next year. Again, those are projections and assumptions. We won't know until we do the third Friday count in September what the real number is regarding that.
What are those assumptions based on, Mr. Bright?
So we've been using a survival cohort methodology. So it looks back at the last 3 to 5 years of transitions from one grade level to the next and looking at the enrollment side. And so it's a predictable model that helps us look at trends, especially on the resident enrollment side. The open enrollment, we control the number of seats, so we can feed that in as we like. But on the resident side, it's very reliable. I've had it be 99.5% reliable when you're looking at that 3-year survival cohort. As you get a little bit longer, it depends on your trends, but the 3 years seems to work best for me.
Have you created this system, or is it a system or a platform that you're utilizing?
It's a platform we use. There are a number of them out there, and they all use a similar type of survival cohort type benchmarking.
Question on that. We've tracked cohort survival here for 17 years. And generally speaking, senior kindergartners survive. We get a bump up at 6th grade. They survive. And then we get another bump up at the beginning of high school. So the Wauwatosa experience is a little more informative than that 3-year model you're using. And the Wauwatosa experience has proven itself for, like I said, 17 years. So it works until it doesn't, of course, but so far it's worked.
Yeah, and it's very similar. So the 3-year survival cohort would show that increase in 6th grade and in 9th grade over a term of those 3 years, and average those together to predict a term for the next year. So it's included in that 3-year survival cohort. So, and that's part of what we're doing this year is we're really looking at this piece later than we should. We'll look at all these aspects in detail much earlier in the budget process as we look forward and vet these things early on and all agree on the enrollments look like this. And if they feed the budget, then here's the impact. So tonight we're doing not backwards, but we're doing it a little bit later than I would like to see.
And one more comment. I don't think we can rely on a projected increase in resident enrollment for the 25 to 26 and 26 to 27 school year. I'm just saying for my vote, for my opinion, for my position, I'm not willing to rely on that for budget.
Yeah, for this year, for the 22-23 budget, we're not relying on those at all. We're relying on, for now, the assumption that on the revenue side, we'll see a decrease of that 52 students, and that's the 3rd year factoring of that 366 student drop 2 years ago, and how it plays with the formula comes in over 3 years following that drop. As we look out at the next 5 years, that's where we'll heavily vet. We'll produce different models, different analysis. We'll look at the actuals and actual trends and compare those to what we saw and come to an agreement on those. But for now, just really looking at the 22-23 school year, again, with a lot more detail to come as we plan out long term. Okay, so on the revenue limit side, so I think you're all aware of this, but for the community to be aware, that applies to the general and capital expansion funds. So that would be the general fund, Fund 10. We also use what we call Fund 11 for our grant accounting, but we merge that with Fund 10 for all the state reporting. We then have the capital expansion fund, which is Fund 41. And that's not to be confused with Fund 49, which is the referendum runout fund. So referendum funds can never be used for operating purposes. What I'm talking about here is the capital expansion fund. So anything that's levied for in capital expansion, Fund 41, takes away from the revenue authority in Fund 10 and vice versa. If you levy less in Fund 41, you can levy the full authority then in Fund 10. So that's how those two funds work. The revenue limit determines over 3/4 of our general fund budget. The rest would be federal aid, other local sources, student fees, that kind of thing. The state aids that come in are all part of the remaining portion of what we see in that revenue pie. Revenue limit is a statutory formula that receives increases or not based on the state biennial budget. And we've talked about this previously too, but there have not been increases for the 21-22 school year or 22-23 with the state biennial budget that we're currently in. So that sets up an interesting fiscal cliff once the federal revenues are gone across the state about where that would be landing. And so I mentioned that last time in the joint finance discussion, but we'll be working with that. And I'll mention advocacy as the last slide to this. It's a statutory formula. There's a 3-year rolling average of membership that factors in. So any increase gets delayed by a year, 2 or 3, and any decrease has the same effect, gets delayed by a year, 2 or 3. There's an allowable per member increase, again, 0 for last year and this year that we're planning into. And then there's certain exemptions that factor in, and I won't get into those in detail. We haven't had a lot of those for Wauwatosa, so I won't focus on those too heavily tonight. But if we get to that range, then I'll let you know what those things are. So just strictly talking revenue limit, again, 22-23, based on the change of 52 less resident students being counted in, that's a drop of $1.2 million to our revenue limit authority. And so again, that's about 3/4 of our budget. So you'll see 1.7 million is what will show for a predicted shortfall in revenues to expenditures. But for now, that's kind of where to leave that one. Looking at the key revenue assumptions, again, $0 on the revenue limit, $0 per pupil aid increase. I'll talk more about that one later too. About a 2% increase in special education aid funding. That's some certain amount that was approved as part of the state biennial budget this last round that did appropriate more dollars statewide, but not what was requested and not keeping pace with the costs of special education here or with other districts. The budget as presented sustains the total open enrollment students at that 1320, as Dr. Beans said earlier. So that's no change from the current year. We do plan to focus heavily and study heavily on kind of where is that sweet spot for Wauwatosa and planning out longer term with both resident and non-resident enrollments and how they factor in both at the district level and at the school level. So we'll be looking at that as we look closer. The capital expansion fund levy, we're reducing that from the original plan of 1.7 million down to $500,000 and repurposing those dollars within the general fund revenue. So again, no cross with the referendum run out, strictly with that capital expansion fund. Key expenditure assumptions that we have, we're looking at reducing base budget for wages, benefits, and utilities. We looked at trends and had some budget surpluses in certain areas. We've been able to leverage some of those to help balance out or get closer to balancing out next year's budget. We reduced the construction projects within the general fund, and that's an important distinction again between 49 and Fund 10 and 41 projects. And then we have additional resources for technology, educational services, human resources, and cybersecurity insurance. So that last one is a big deal, and it's predicted that we'll see 20% increases on a line item for insurance that was in the tens of thousands of dollars that will go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next several years. So that is something we'll need to plan into and again, advocate for additional funds for, because it's not just a Wauwatosa problem, it's a statewide public sector problem that we need to face. The recently adopted teacher compensation plan is fully funded in this budget and beyond. It's a recurring sustained item within all of our budget planning. So that's well suited for that purpose. Staffing is always adjusted based on enrollment from one year to the next. So if we see trends up or down in enrollment, we'll adjust staffing for that same trend. We're not seeing anything across the system that is a huge change from what we have currently. So the way that we filter through all the schools, all the grades, probably doesn't have much of an effect, but we'll continue to monitor that closely as we look into the future. And then the budget does include a 3.4% for all classified staff. So all non-teaching staff within that budget framework. So that's all embedded within the numbers that you saw last meeting and that you'll see again at this meeting.
So in terms of practicality and in terms of how it impacts kids and teachers, the one you probably have heard us use the terminology before, bubble class or bubble section, where a class is at the elementary level is getting so large, you may need to split it. There's only one area that we were looking at right now as a bubble class, and that's senior kindergarten at Wilson. And right now they have 27 young people as caterers to one teacher. My opinion is that that's a lot. That's too high. We want to see if all of those 27 students do register, but if they do, we've already started the conversation with Mr. Hoyne that we may have to split the class. Splitting a class at the elementary level is complex in that you have to have furniture, fixtures, and equipment to make sure that you can address the needs of those kids. We've also started to speak with our academic performance team and Ms. Ebert to make sure that there are books and materials for those kids. So that's where we stand at the elementary level. At the secondary level, we'll have to see how registration continues to move forward. When young people move into our community, either at the middle school or high school level, you have to enroll them for courses. And eventually the leadership at both Tulsa East and Tulsa West, Whitman and Longfellow, will inform us that we've seen an increase in those numbers too. So to Mr. Brightman's point, we do flex and adjust to where we see enrollment increases as we get closer to September 1st.
Thank you, sir. Now the numbers on this slide have not changed since the last meeting, so I won't focus too heavily on this unless there's questions on it. But our total revenue for our general fund is at $83.9 million, and total expenditures are at $85.54 million. And so that sets up a structural deficit of that $1.681 million. And as we discussed at the last meeting, we do have a plan to address that deficit. We have funds that we received this year that were unbudgeted and unplanned. There was a Governor's CARES Act allocation where the governor had a discretionary allocation, and Wauwatosa received just under $800,000 from that pool of dollars. That will flow into the district's fund balance at June 30th of this year. Likewise, we had a FEMA reimbursement and an E-rate reimbursement, which are both federal reimbursements, of $485,000 and $347,000 that will have the same effect, flow into our fund balance. And then we're going to project a year-end surplus of this year just on operating expenditures of well over $1 million. And so right now, the plug for that is using $55,000 of that surplus towards bridging next year's budget deficit to total up to that $1.68 million. And in this case, it's appropriate to use these funds to bridge that gap for a couple reasons. We're facing the $0 increase for the revenue parameters I mentioned earlier. And likewise, those are unplanned funds that have increased the district or will increase the district's fund balance and can be leveraged for next year's budget balancing purposes. So that's part of the recommendation. Any questions on that? And then haven't sensed this to be as front and center in this community as it was in my prior, but the tax levy is one that we all care about and concerned about and watch closely. As you can look at, the general fund tax levy is down considerably. That will happen every other year with the debt structure that we have, and I think you're well versed with that aspect of it. But as we look at the total tax levy going from just over $57 million current year to $57.15 million for next year. So in the scheme of that magnitude of a number, a 0.21% increase is essentially flat on the tax levy side. We're a little conservative in what we predict for state aid. Any additional state aid we get would reduce this levy by the same dollar magnitude. And so I would expect based on that, we're flat, if not a small decrease to the tax levy for Wauwatosa. So once we get to October 15th, we get that state aid certification. We won't know until that time. Likewise, in the tax rate or mill rate, this is where you take the total levy from the last slide, divide it into the total property valuation for the district, and that gives you the $7.85 per thousand of value. So if you're calculating the school tax on your home's value, you can take the $7.85 times 300 if your home value is $300,000, which then gives you a school tax of that $2,354. And so if your home value is $500,000, you take the $785 times 500, and that will give you the tax impact on your own home. So it's a pretty easy calculation once you have that formula to understand the magnitude of it. Based on the tax rate and the increased property values, which again is slightly conservative, we're seeing a slight drop to the tax rate from one year to the next on that taxpayer of that $300,000 example home. And then all of the other funds that we work with, Special Education Fund is Fund 27. That's a self-balancing fund with a transfer from the general fund to special education. But revenues, expenditures matching at just over $14 million for that one. We have debt service. We just have the issue that was issued back in 2018, 2019 with that referendum. And so we'll have a recurring fund balance there to pay future debt payments for that fund. Capital expansion, that's 41, the one that is paired with the revenue limit. You can see there we have the $500,000 levy versus the 1.7 that I mentioned in an earlier slide. Planning right now about $700,000 in expenditures. I believe Greg is going to relay about $580,000 of expenditures that are currently planned out of that $700,000. But we'd have an ending fund balance then of $3.76 million in that fund at the end of next year. That could be purposed for a future facility need. The referendum rundown, We have about $4.65 million of funds left to spend next fiscal year on that rough run and run out. Our school nutrition fund, Fund 50, is a proprietary fund. We expect that fund to at least break even, if not make a profit, because they need to pay for their own equipment replacements, utilities, that kind of thing. As they look forward, we do have a balanced budget for Fund 50. And then Community Service Fund, the majority of that is the seed and rep program that's embedded within that fund. And likewise, we want to see that fund sustain itself from the program side, but then have a levy supporting some of the operating side with that. But a good fund balance for that fund also of 1.2 million.
And we also pay for our school resource officers.
That is
out
correct.
of Fund 80.
Correct.
As a FYI.
Okay, so here's the request. So remember, the yellow highlighted item for next meeting is requesting board action to adopt a preliminary general fund and full budget for 22-23. And that would be, reflecting that deficit position that I outlined earlier. As part of that, at fiscal year end, we will assign $1.68 million of fund balance towards next year's budget deficit. And that shores up any concerns that there might be with having a deficit budget with that. And so we'll classify that as subsequent year's expenditures. And I think Roger Dixon made a mention of that at the last meeting also. And then, my opinion, the most important thing is thinking longer term than just next year's budget. And we're entering a phase of what I consider a critical state budget climate. And the next state biennial budget will take effect a year from now. And so we'll start our long-term planning sooner than we typically would. I mentioned earlier, the budget calendar would suggest December, January. We'll start maybe October-ish to start with hard binding what we have as far as needs, what those costs are, what our budget projections look like with different varying levels of state support, and make sure we're communicating those things carefully with legislators. So as you know, we're going to see unprecedented inflationary pressure on our cost structures in the district, and we see it in our own lives also. One of the things I've requested in the past is something aligned to CPI or some economic indicator that provides revenues to keep pace with the cost of things that we pay for as a system. The fiscal cliff, as I mentioned, was recognized by Joint Finance as part of the last budget that they approved. It was not part of the state budget that was approved by the governor, but it was approved and recognized by Joint Finance. So we want to remind them of that and that need as the federal funds are eliminated as of the end of the 23-24 school year. The per pupil aid, which replaced some of the revenue limit funding back in 2013-ish, is a place that legislators tend to prefer putting funding over revenue limits because it completely circumvents any impact on local property taxes. So that may be a way to leverage and get some additional resources for Wauwatosa School District. We want to focus on the long-term funding for students with disabilities and that funding reimbursement, and going from the current 30% up to a long-term goal of that 60+%, knowing that it's hard to get there one shot, but an incremental maybe 5% every year or every biennium to get there until we hit the 60% is sustainable by the state. We know the state surplus is significant,
$5.2 billion.
And that number is going to go up as the cost of goods go up and sales tax collections go up from that. So that number will only increase. So this may be an opportune time to request some of these things that
So they have a reserve at the state level of $5.2 billion.
Correct.
And we have a need. Keith, before you move on to the last bullet point, I just want to illustrate this for the community. Can you explain the funding for students with disabilities? You referenced the current 30%. What does that mean in terms of the actual cost for a student with disabilities? How much does the taxpayer in Wauwatosa shoulder, and how much does the state or federal government, which has made a commitment and a promise to pay more for those students, how much are they paying?
Yeah, so Fund 27 is kind of fun, in my opinion, to optimize how we're using those resources. So as we look at the expenditure budget for Fund 27, it includes all the things you would expect. The revenue side has federal funding, which comes through for specific programming and specific purposes. We leverage that funding to the extent we can. What's not covered by federal funds then goes to some state reimbursement of, it was as low as 18% of those costs were reimbursed just a few years ago, and it's been propped up to 30%, which we're thankful for. But the remaining 80% at that time, and now 70% now, are funded by the local district by a transfer from Fund 10 to 27. So that's the portion that is funded by the local taxpayer in the current climate.
Thank you.
And then, yes, the last bullet is extremely important. So outside of revenue limits, outside of our control, outside of the current normal operating structure the school district have, we all recognize that there's additional school safety and mental health concerns and needs that are within our system and districts across the state. So we're going to look at requesting additional support, financial support for those areas, as well as that cybersecurity. That cybersecurity is what keeps me up at night because it does happen to districts, local districts, and it is significant when it happens. We do a great job here of doing what we can to prevent it, but even the Pentagon has things happen. So, we can only get so far. If something does happen, we need the supports there to make sure we can recover as quickly as possible.
Pentagon doesn't have Jamie Price.
Exactly. That's what I told them today. So that's the presentation that we had tonight for in preparation for the budget hearing, and hopefully to give the board enough information to get to an informed approval at the next board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
I disagree with your enrollment assumptions. So administration since 06 and 07 has, well, actually earlier than that, 05 and 06 has provided me with a resident enrollment every year, which is a little bit different from your membership that you talked about because the membership includes the tuition waiver. But your enrollment projections have us going up in membership between 300 and 400. I'm using round numbers, so please correct me if I'm wrong. And our resident enrollment has only varied by about 200 students since 04 and 05. Low point is in the 5600s, like 5635 and 07, 08. And we were above 5800 only twice, 5810 in 11 to 12, and then 5852 in 19 to 20. And then we were 5676 this current year. So you're projecting an increase in membership of 300 to 400, and that's justifying surpluses produced then are justifying our spending down the fund balance now in order to balance the budget. But if the enrollment projections don't come to pass for the increases in membership, we will have spent down our fund balance and we will have used up some of our cushion to deal with the financial difficulty that we will have. I actually think we're on a path to closing an elementary school in 3 to 5 years based on forces that are out of our control now. Some of those forces driven by decisions we've made in the past, but some of them out of our control. So as a mathematical document, it's a fine budget, but I just can't see the enrollment assumptions coming true. I hope they do, but I can't accept the risk of what we're doing. I would position ourselves for, at best, flat enrollment, and then do the math to make things work out from there.
So referring to the slide that we have up.
Yeah. I'm not quarreling with the quality of your document. I'm not quarreling with the quality of your mathematical analysis. My disagreement is with the assumption on enrollment that we will increase in those numbers. It just hasn't been there since 04 to 05. We've basically been stable, haven't gone up, and we've gone up and down, but there hasn't been any dramatic increase or decrease. So that's where my conservative mind, my worry about disaster comes into play. And I say, oh boy, I'm kind of worried about this. And I don't, who knows how long I'll still be on the board. And, we're told, there's might be some transition. We have two new board members this year. I don't want to leave a a legacy. We all leave the board and let them figure it out what they're going to do. Yeah, it's just to say I'm not comfortable with these assumptions, and that's my position.
Yeah, I can say the numbers 2016, 17 through the 21, 22 school year on the chart are actual numbers. And so I think the delta between your 5,600 number and what I'm showing here is about closer to 6,000. For membership, we count resident students that attend Wauwatosa schools, and we count resident students that open and roll out of the district. So
Right. My numbers are only the attendees
correct.
physically attending in Wauwatosa, not considering those tuition waiver. If you have reason to think that number could play into this differently than it has in the past, then my numbers won't inform me of anything. And
Gotcha.
And yeah.
Yep. So the revenue membership, it counts both of those students, whether they're residents that attend or go out to attend somewhere else, because that's what we get to count for revenue authority. So again, it's confusing with the enrollment versus the revenue authority, and it always has been and always will be.
Just two things, Mr. Brightman, for the community. Now, I've heard community members make the statement, that's a different topic for another day in terms of resident students making the decision to open enrollment out of their public school district. That's another conversation for another day, but that is still an issue. We shouldn't, just because we're able to count those students in the membership count doesn't dismiss the larger conversation. That's number one, which this board has had in the past. And then number two, I just want to be clear in terms of how we're defining the word fund balance and how we're using fund balance. The funds that we have identified, I think it's the slide, it is slide, I can tell you which slide I'm speaking to.
Is where I talk about assigning.
It's slide 12. So when we discuss the topic of fund balance, that is the technical term we should use. However, the reality of it is these are funds that, due to our prudent, conservative budgeting for the 21-22 school year, we were able to place in fund balance, where most school districts had to use their Governor CARES Act money and FEMA money and E-rate connectivity money to just close their 21-22 budget. We were able to say, we don't have to use this right now. We can place it in fund balance. And so, yes, technically it is fund balance. However, it was money that was given to the school district to sustain us. And then the last thing is that last line, projected 21-22 surplus. That means we're coming under budget for the 21-22 school year. We're anticipating that to be maybe over $1 million, and your request of the board is to use $55,000 of those funds. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Is there any other board discussion? I just wanted to, I know there was a note that Mr. Meyer and Mr. Phillips met with you, and I want to bring some of those questions maybe to the board table tonight, just to understand, what questions were we receiving? What did you, what did you vet in those discussions that we all might benefit from?
Yeah, so I think when Mr. Meyer and I met, we talked through some of the historical open enrollment discussions that had happened. By coincidence, there's some synergy there. I happened to be at Elmbrook at the same time, and we were looking at some of the same models that were used in Wauwatosa at that time. There was a parent who was active in the Wauwatosa financial modeling of that, who then moved into the Elmbrook district, and I worked with that parent to create a model for the Elmbrook purposes. So we kind of based on that. So when I saw what you had shared with me, it brought back some memories of where I had seen that before. So we looked at that. We talked through some of the longer term planning aspects of trying to find that sweet spot and having a range, high, medium, low, of what that might look like as far as where it makes sense to have non-resident students. I believe we talked about some districts that have an excessive number of non-resident students, and that may not be healthy. But there are districts that allow no non-resident students, and that's probably not the right decision either. So somewhere in the middle is the right place to be. So currently Wauwatosa is at about that 16% level. That doesn't, in my mind, seem unreasonable by any means. So whether that's a sweet spot that we talked about, I don't know. Otherwise, I think it was just more or less introductions. I'm impressed with 18 years of board service. I think that's the longest tenure I've met in my career. So that's appreciated.
17 right there.
17, so the second longest then.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. But it was really just an introductory meeting. We met for about an hour. Dr. Means joined us for part of it and then not for part of it. So it was a good discussion, I thought. And you're able to share some historic documents with me too that I've had a chance to kind of look at a little bit, not as much as I'd like, but we'll get there as we start thinking out longer term. With Mr. Phillips is again an introductory meeting. We had met as part of the interview process, so got introductions there. But Mr. Phillips is reaching out to give some support to giving some feedback when I request it, or having involvement in things like the purchasing item, which we'll talk about later in the board meeting. If there's suggestions or help that he can provide in his banking experience within our purchasing, procurement, and cash management, he's more than happy to kind of help there. I think we met for about 30 minutes. Yeah. A little bit of a quicker meeting and higher level, I think. But again, just a nice way to get to know the different board members, and I'll be reaching out to all of you and trying to schedule something at some point through the summer, like I said. So,
May I?
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
May I cite my opening comments where I said, no way, in any way, shape, or form, is anything that Mike Meyer says an instruction to you. That the only instructions from the board are when we call the roll on an agended action item. If I do tell you what to do, you need to disregard that and don't do it unless you want to on your own regard. I also am interested in tracking. I want to get information to inform my vote. So I'm interested in how we spend our money. So spending reports. So if we do come to a budget crossroads, I want to be as informed as possible about where our money goes from actually a cost accounting, cost management perspective. So that if the day comes when cuts are proposed, I know, of course, when there's a cut proposed, we know what the cut is proposed, but it's harder to understand when cut is not being proposed. So I really want to learn. For me, my mission for my 3-year term is to fully understand how we spend our money, and then to bring that to the boardroom for our discussion.
Thank you. And I would concur that every seat here wants that and does that. So we had several board members asking questions. We had several community members asking questions. And I just want to make sure that we're having a robust enough discussion this evening and that we don't need any deeper dives into the data before our vote on the 27th. So I heard tonight enrollment assumptions was the biggest concern by one of the board members. I also heard what is the actual status of our fund balance? And I myself heard a 20% increase in health insurance. Is that what I thought I heard you say possibly coming up?
no.
Okay.
Cybersecurity.
Oh, cybersecurity. Okay. So, but in insurance, in the
that aspect of
insurance
insurance.
aspect.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. But those are my questions. Those are my takeaways. And then considering we do have, this is a preliminary budget. We have a transient population, but we have seen unprecedented inflation. We have that big drop, over 300 student drop in enrollment, and we won't be making that up. We also have on the expense side, the greatest assets we have are our people, and that's where our expenses are. And so in addition to that, Wauwatosa has been very fiscally conservative, and we've talked about not short-term borrowing.
Correct.
So So this budget is, I think, the best we can do preliminarily. I just wonder if along the same lines of, do we really need to take any deeper dives in any of these topics before we vote, just to be sure?
Yeah, I could say this budget includes everything that you just talked about is embedded within this budget that we're looking at tonight. The preliminary budget is just that. It's based on a number of assumptions that we won't know until we get to September. The October original budget adoption is the key one that gets published and gets, all the formality around it. So we have time between now and then to, put actuals in place, continue to look at costs, continue to look at inflation and all the other aspects that come into play. And we'll know actual enrollments by that point too.
Yes.
The only deeper dive I can think of is, and this has been provided to the board recurring regularly over the years, are the enrollment counts. And if we had parallel membership counts, then the board could see for the, since 0405, what resident enrollments have actually been. So you can see with your eyes what I've been talking about. The only difference I see is that whether you agree or don't agree on the enrollment projection. And we've been debating that for 18 years, which way enrollment is going to go. And 18 years ago, I was optimistic. Right now, I think we'll be lucky if we hold it flat, but the future is the future and unpredictable. So when we vote in October, we're going to know the September enrollment counts.
Correct.
So we're going to know a lot more, right? So if enrollment drops this year over next year over this current year, we'll know we have to handle some stuff. If it's gone up, hey, good news. Yeah.
And I think in terms of the projections of membership and potential or future enrollment, as Mr. Brightman referenced, we're going to accelerate the building of the 23-24 budget sooner, and having those projections and discussing it at that time is the more appropriate format or platform, if you will, for the board to talk about forecasting for enrollment and membership.
Right. And for the 22-23 budget, we're projecting the 52 student drop on the revenue side, which is the critical factor in determining resources for the system. And we know that because of the 366 that happened in 1920 or 2021.
Ms. Fraley?
Be a little bit more concise. So this is not a directive suggestion. I'm curious, what are you using beyond relationship and whatnot to sort of look at the national landscape specific to financial modeling right now? Because I know it's really changing.
So financial modeling for school
districts, do you look at Edunomics out of Georgetown? Because so much is different, I feel like, in terms of what I see coming across my desk in terms of inflation in school districts, in terms of financial modeling in relation to school district salary negotiations, things like that.
Yep. So in a prior job that I had with a private sector company, and I developed a model for school finance modeling for Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So I've got kind of my head around that side. Mm-hmm. There are two very good models done, one by Baird and one by Forecast 5, which is now changed its name, but two very sophisticated models, and I've used both of them recently. We've been using the Baird model in Wauwatosa, and so I've been using that one since I joined a few weeks ago or a couple months ago, looking at that one. So either one is pretty detailed and pretty good at line item, looking at the inflationary costs of utilities versus supplies versus labor costs versus, it's all in there.
I just want to make sure that we're looking out and not just
very much. Yes.
Because this is a highly unusual time. Districts of all sizes are struggling.
I think it's going to be when we start to think 3 to 5 years out, what does inflation look like 3 to 5 years out? And that's none of us know. So that's where let's start looking at some assumptions, low, medium, high versus various key inputs, and try not to get too hung up on the detail things, because they're not going to be right. We're going to do our best estimates on things, and we'll look towards outside sources for longer term trends, definitely. Yeah. But as we're looking just at the 22-23 budget, we know what the current inflationary cost increases are currently. And what we're seeing as far as hopefully a leveling off of those things in the near term. Don't know what that means long term.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we're like looking at really data-driven national sources. And it doesn't seem, in my experience, that there are that many organizations that collect that sort of like comprehensive level data by state or by district size and whatnot. So definitely.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Meyer?
One more comment. So a lot of my suggestions for programming are greatly driven by budgetary considerations that, because of the lifeblood of resident enrollment, if enrollment sustains from senior kindergarten on, we want wraparound programs to encourage senior kindergartens to be here. If we get a big bump in resident enrollment, 50 a year, which translates to 200 over a 4-year period, which multiplied times the state aid, for high school enrollment, well, now I'm promoting high school course offerings that might be appealing to parents wanting to make a decision, or whatever it is that appeals to parents when they're choosing where to send their student for 9th grade. That a lot of what I promote is driven by those considerations to enhance our revenue position.
Well, that is why we have strategic planning. And those ideas should be coming forward. If there's no other board comment, I would like to open this up for the public hearing.
Hello, my name is Julie Alexander, and I'm at 7224 West State Street, Unit 1A in Wauwatosa. Very interesting presentation here. Just a couple of comments I have, and I mean, I've been in the advocacy role for over 30 years, and I know that landscape very well, actually, unfortunately sometimes. But I know that when I'm looking at the budget, I know that we're dealing with a very, very hard audience at the state. I know that for publicly funded supports for people with disabilities and just people that are poor, they've actually pointed out Milwaukee County and said that you're not getting any of our money. So it's a real tight, it's very tight because of feelings at the state level. And I'm not being political. I see legislators, both Republican and Democrat and independent, whatever. But basically it's a tight thing. So, I mean, you have to really be looking at a really good strategy to be really looking at that. They're also not I've not found many people on the state level, and we visit every legislator in the state at least once a year that is really pro public education either. So, I mean, I think that you have to be looking at that in a really targeted way to try and see if there's any change. But I've been in the system and I've been an advocate for over 30 years, and the landscape hasn't changed that much. It's, we can move the needle a little bit, but I think if we're looking at trying to get any type of budget from the state, especially being from Milwaukee County, it's going to be a tough call. And I think there needs to be some really good strategy to try and do that. And I guess the other thing is I'm looking at where, in terms of our overall surplus, which includes a little bit of the CARES Act funding, which was a little bit of ESSER funding too. It's a little scary for me to be using a lot of that for this. And I know that puts you guys all in a really tough situation here. But I mean, it's, the rainy day fund is not really being used much. It was used this year. I don't know what's going to happen next year. On the other hand, the other thing that I know for a fact that right now the state legislature is closed and not doing business until January. So basically they're doing their little research stuff, but they're actually not open and not really meeting with people. So just to let you know that, there's really not much going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm BJ Ermans, and I live at 2749 North 75th Street. I appreciate the challenges all of you are facing with these budgets, and I would second what Julie said, that we, not you, the school board, but we, the citizens of Milwaukee County and Wauwatosa, need to find a way to get the legislature to give us our fair share of funds so that we at least have a chance of properly funding our schools. I do ask also that the CARES fund not be used as a budget healing measure, because the intent of those funds was to help especially students the most hurt by COVID, and to help them get back some of the progress that they lost. And I see those funds being best used for people, students with disabilities who really suffered during the COVID years. And I don't know where else we'd make up the money, but I'm just saying where I would prefer it be used. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I appreciate that comment. I want to be very explicit. That comment should not be posed to the Board of Education of Wauwatosa School District. We had a state legislature when they passed the most recent biannual budget that told board members across the state, use your CARES dollars. Well, let me back up. Use your ESSER dollars to close your budget shortfalls. That's what the legislature told board all 425 school districts across the state. The CARES dollars actually came from Governor Evers because he witnessed what the legislature did to school districts and provided the money so school districts could function. So I am so appreciative of those comments. And I think it just highlights the fact, and when we talked about this in our presentation, this same presentation to the Strategic Planning Steering Committee, the way that state funding works in Wisconsin, a state legislator who represents La Crosse has more or has as much power over what type of funding is going to happen and be provided to students in Wauwatosa than you do as board members. And that's our reality. So I know later in the agenda, there will be discussion on who wants to be part of the Legislative Advocacy Committee. I think what Mr. Brightman and some of our community members are sharing is that that's a very important committee.
Thank you, Dr. Means.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any other public comments? I don't see any in the room. Are there any online?
Yeah, we have one hand raised. Deb Falk-Palak, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Thank you, Deb Falk-Palak. Mr. Myers' comment that he's interested in how money is spent. I am too. I'm still trying to figure out how our district used our nearly $400,000 we received in extra IDEA funds that was released from the federal government. So how can citizens find that information out? I am a little, I'm also still really, if you look at our ESSER plan, And have we truly done what DPI told us to do with that 20%? And it's very clearly stated on the DPI website how that money was to be used, who it was to be used for, and how, if that was to be questioned with Wauwatosa's plan, how could we find out that indeed we met what DPI's requirement was with that ESSER plan? So I am interested, as Mr. Meyer and Mrs. Muehlfeld said, of course, I would think all board members are interested in how the money is being spent, but how do we see how this money and these dollars are being spent? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other?
Yeah, there are no more hands raised.
Okay. Any other public comment in the room? Okay, I don't see no. Mr. Brightman, did you?
I wasn't sure if you wanted me to clarify the IDA funding.
Yes, please, if you are able to.
Yeah, so those funds are very prescribed in how we can utilize those funds. They can't be repurposed for anything that we choose to fund in the system. So there are specific special education related costs that have to be used for those funds. So I'm confident they went towards the intended purpose for those IDEA special education funds. As far as the ESSER funds, we're well exceeding the 20% threshold that's for ESSER 3 at least. With the CARES funding in what we're spending on the EBIS, which is the early behavioral interventions portion of it, which I think is what the person was discussing. So well in excess, we're using all of our ESSER 2 and 3 funds towards purposes that are not budget stabilization, that are for the purposes of the intent of the federal legislation. So the only one that we are using for budget balancing purposes is what Dr. Bean suggested, that Governor Waiver suggested, is that he had the appropriation that he intended us to use for budget stabilization because the state legislature did not. So I think we're following all the prescribed and recommended uses for those funds.
Thank you for those comments and the clarification. So I know that you were mentioning, Mr. Brightman, that you might put together an FAQ if there are some questions that are coming in between now and the 27th. And maybe further clarification of some of the questions that we heard tonight would be helpful as well, based on our prior plans and approved plans. So if that would then conclude our public hearing on this topic, and we will be voting on the preliminary budget at our next meeting, June 27th. Okay. Then our next topic will be the business services action items.
It is recommended that the school board approve the renewal of the food service management contract with Sodexo Operations, LLC for the 2022-2023 school year as presented at the May 23rd meeting, and I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any board discussion on this topic? No further discussion. Is there any community comment on this topic? No community comment online?
No hands raised.
Okay. Seeing none, may I have a roll call?
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Hoig?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Muehlfeld?
Yes, thank you. The next item is approval of the cleaning contract extension. Dr. Hoig.
It is recommended that the school board approve the cleaning services agreement with Dan Ploutz Cleaning Services as presented at the May 23, 2022 board meeting, and I so move.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Is there any further board discussion? Seeing none, is there any community comment on this topic? There is none in the room.
There are no hands raised virtually.
Okay, thank you. May I have a roll call?
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Newfeld.
Yes, thank you. Our next topic is this school board action item, and that's the Legislative Advocacy Committee representative appointments. May I have a motion, Dr. Hoig?
It is recommended that the school board approve the president's appointment of two board members, Leanne Fraley and Eric Jessup Anger, as members of the Legislative Advocacy Committee for a term of June 2022 through May 2023. And I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Is there any further board discussion on this topic? We had discussed it at our last meeting. Seeing none, is there any community comment? Seeing none in the room, is there any online comment?
No hands raised.
No comment. Ms. Newman, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Fraley,
Can I ask a question first?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, Ms. Fraley.
Like, I can't vote on this, right?
No.
Or can I? Because there's two
You
of us.
technically could, but if you are hesitant because it's appointing yourself.
Yeah, it just feels weird.
You can't sustain.
Okay, abstain.
Abstain.
Okay.
Abstain. Sorry.
Thank you.
Abstain.
Dramatic pause.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Newfeld.
Yes. And thank you, Ms. Fraley, and for Dr. Just Banker, who isn't here this evening, for taking up that appointment. And we look to a very robust legislative planning session in anticipation of January. Our next set of reports will start with business services reports, the proposed capital improvement projects for 2022, 2023. Dr. Means, would you have an introduction?
Greg is our Director of Buildings and Grounds. We'll be presenting a total of 40 projects that we would like to accomplish with our Fund 41 or capital improvements budget. That is different from Fund 49, which is our referendum money. And I think that's really important to know. The other thing that I think is really important, so thank you, Madam Chair, as I'm getting used to doing the bridge as we get technology ready. We have a fund balance, a healthy fund balance of $3.6 million in Fund 41. And so while we have reduced that line item this year, we do have enough money to move forward with it in the future. I will state that this is a one-year issue. We're unable to sustain ourselves as a school district by reducing that Fund 41 to $500,000. A district our size should have a healthy annual dollar amount in the line item for Fund 41. I think it's based on our challenges this year budgetarily. We're making the shift, but the more you can do preventative maintenance to your school, your schools and your facilities, the more likely you don't need a larger referendum dollar amount every so often. So we do know and understand that moving forward that that's not something that's sustainable to have a line item of $500,000 or so in Fund 41. But with that being said, Greg, welcome this evening.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to your presentation of projects.
Okay. It's good to see you all.
It's good to see you too.
Thank you. So just, I know that some of this stuff gets a little repetitive with some of my presentations, but just to kind of keep, the history of things going. You obviously all know that we completed a facility study in 2017, which eventually through an entire process led to the referendum in 2018. With the district nearly complete, planning on being complete this school year with the referendum projects. We're now having the facility study updated. We have partnered actually with PRA to
do an updated facility study, looking at all of our schools now that we have done how many millions of dollars worth of work to them. That will be something that will be presented to the school board at some point. And it will be the district's intent upon completion of that we utilize that as a tool going forward to figure out how do we move forward now that we've done all of this work? How do we fund it and all of that? So we'll be working on that in the upcoming months. As I know Keith indicated in his presentation and Dr. Means, I think the fund balance for Capital Expansion Fund 41 currently is something like 3.963 with anticipated expenditures of about $700,000, leaving at the end of this school year about 3.8 million. The plan for using those funds and how we fund future capital improvement projects going forward will be developed and part of that process of determining long-range facilities plans. There are, however, a few projects that I am aware of that really kind of need to get done sooner than later here. So I've listed simply just 4 projects. And these are projects with estimated budget numbers and estimated completion times. East High School, and I'll talk about each one individually as we go, but East High School condensate tank replacement, Roosevelt Masonry repairs, renovation of conference room E, and the Madison main entrance sidewalk with a total estimated budget currently of $580,000. So the condensate tank and the pumps for East High School, essentially, I think we've all talked about East High School boilers before. Our steam system, this is not the boilers themselves. This is a component of that system, and it returns condensate back to the boilers so that we're not constantly dumping fresh water into that system. It is still functional. We have done some repairs in the last few years to it, but it's starting to reach a point that if we don't do something proactively, it could fail. So I am proposing that we replace it. It's starting to thin some of the tank walls and stuff like that. And if it gets to a point where it thins too much, it could be a major problem for us. So, and again, this is a proactive replacement, avoiding potentially having to be reactive. So this is another one. Roosevelt's Masonry is it's in pretty poor shape. This is something that I knew about when my predecessor was here a couple of years back, had proposals done, but it, for whatever reason, didn't make the list for referendum projects. You know, I shared just a couple of pictures, but a lot of the tuck pointing and stuff needs to be done. There's a lot of brick that needs to be replaced. There's a lot of things with caulking and stuff, and what it is currently doing now is it's causing leaks in our building. And it's to the point where it's becoming not only a concern for cleanliness of the building and health of our students and all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, you don't want leaks in the building, but some of it has actually started to become a little bit of a safety concern with one corner of the building, actually an entire crack that kind of goes down on an angle vertically that needs to be addressed. So with the expanding of staff in the school district and seemingly we're kind of busting at the seams here at the Fisher Administration Building. It's being proposed that we essentially turn conference room E into an office suite. There is a committee that I will be on that we will be discussing kind of the layout of where everyone currently is in the Fisher Building, what kind of spaces we have in the district, who should be here, who should be there. So we'll be developing that, but we know we need additional offices. So turning conference room E into an office suite will include 4 new offices. It would have some small storage. It'll have an open area out in it for open work to be done in meeting space. It'll also get a new rooftop unit for heating and cooling. Currently, right now, we're part of the hot water system here, and there's no way to divide that up for the heating portion of it. And I can tell you, I know for a fact that the rooftop unit that is currently there for cooling has been needing to be replaced for some time. So this would be part of that project as well, including new carpeting and finishes and all of that, as well as office furniture. And Madison's main entryway. So I know that this one has been brought up several times by community members at school board meetings in the past, and it is most certainly in disrepair. It is to the point where we can no longer patch it and make it safe. There are trip hazards. It is completely upheaved towards the street and all unlevel, and is definitely a concern. So we certainly want to take care of replacing that yet this summer. And I would like to note that this is actually also going to add, currently on the street itself, I believe that's 104th, does have a spot for ADA accessible parking, but you would literally have to go all the way down to the corner to get to a ramp to get up onto the sidewalk. So what this would do, not only replace the entire walkway, but they would cut out the curb and make it ADA accessible down to the street level so that people with ADA needs parking there are able to immediately come right up to our walkway. And my recommendation would be to proceed forward with these projects using the fund balance money from Capital Expansion Fund 41. Upon moving forward or approval of moving forward, it's understood that policy would be followed and additional approvals of bids when needed would be presented to the school board. And I certainly welcome questions, comments, feedback, and input.
Thank you for the presentation. Any board questions or comments? Ms. Fraley.
So easier for me to get behind projects that are for the schools. And I know we hired a bunch of staff. So are there any other options for ensuring we have productive workspaces for staff? Or is, and I'm not saying I don't trust what's being brought to us. For me, I always want students to be at the forefront, and it's one of the higher budget dollar amounts. So that was just my initial reaction when I saw it.
We embrace the concept of trust but verify. So thank you. When you look at the current configuration of district, and it's not an issue of hiring more staff. I want to be very clear about it. I think if you ask people who are based in the Fisher building now, we would say that there are people who are homeless.
Okay.
They don't have a space right now, but their main work is here at the Fisher building. Sure, we could put people in empty classrooms at some of our elementary schools and configure those areas as office spaces as well. The same dollar amount will be expended if you use empty class space or if you convert the conference room E. It will give us the ability to step back and look at how we are utilizing office space for our 4 special education coordinators or our library coordinator. The way that we've kind of configured people right now in Fisher, I'll give a prime example. Our library coordinator is in the student services office. I don't know why that's the case. That's not a good workflow. That person should be in our teaching and learning team, but there is limited space right now for that team. But we're also very cognizant of the point that you're raising, which is of the 4 projects, this is the most expensive, and it doesn't directly have impact on students.
And then
I would just respectfully and humbly state that when the people who are supporting the buildings have the ability to do their work in a very functional, appropriate way, schools are served more efficiently, which then does impact students.
Any other board questions, Mr. Meyer?
Well, let me build on that. In a year where we have to vastly cut back on our capital spending, we from over 1 million to 580,000. We're going to take 60% of that money and build nice offices for high-paid administrators. No, I don't support this at all. I'm a little surprised that, now I voted no on most of these positions. Kind of saw stuff coming here. If hiring these new administrators, if we'd have been told at the beginning that it was going to be, we were going to, as a follow-up, be asked to authorize 60% of our capital budget, like $250,000 to give them places to sit after we sign the contracts for their salaries. This is the kind of thing that leads the community to believe that we have this fat administration structure pay-wise, and that we're shortchanging the children for the administrators and shortchanging the teachers as well. So if we line up all of the capital things, if we maybe for the next meeting, bring us a list of all the capital things we're not doing, and the board can see what is not being done so that $350,000 can be spent for offices for administrators, well, then we have complete information to decide this on. But right now, I don't see it. There are, by perspective in the private sector, there are extraordinarily well-paid, powerful, learned people with very important jobs on a national scale who sit in cubicles. And it doesn't cost this kind of money. So somehow the expectations here for the appointments provided for a school administrator maybe does need to be reconsidered for me. Thank you.
I want to be clear. We have space at Fisher right now. It's just, it's not appropriate. Number one, in terms of we will place certain administrators. We could place the Director of Diversity and Inclusion in the Human Resources office. That person won't have direct connection with their direct supervisor, but that's okay. They could get up and move in that direction. Again, I'll go back to the conversation of it's not just administrators. We have coordinators and we have other people who are on teacher contracts who don't have workspaces. And I think you're raising a great point in regards to, so what are you choosing against? As administrators, we never want to present to you issues where you don't know what you're choosing against. That's why we engaged PRA on a facilities review, because before this school year, we didn't have that type of analysis. If we had a list of ongoing Fund 41 projects that Greg and the Buildings and Grounds were choosing against, then you would have the ability to choose against one versus the other. We don't have that information right now. Is that accurate, sir?
That is accurate. So I used to sit in a workspace in a cubicle that was literally no bigger than the one I'm sitting at now, with 4-foot-high walls around me, and no room for a second chair, because I mean, the perspective here isn't whether they have workspace. This is a workspace I'm at. What do they need an office with? They can close the door and all this kind of stuff. I mean, there are traveling consultants who have a roll around file cabinet back before computers, and they didn't get their own office. I mean, I just don't see that if we're only spending $580,000 on capital money for a whole year because we're short on money, I can't believe that what amounts to very expensive workspace relative to other needs, I can't see that this is 60% of our entire capital budget is for administrator offices. I can't support that. I just can't.
No, you're raising a great point. Just for clarity's sake, and I appreciate you kind of raising this up. The concept was the Chief of People Services, which is Lou Pinion, our director of special education, our director of diversity and inclusion, and our director of student success would be in this space. And those are 4 administrators who are dealing with very sensitive, sometimes family student issues. And that was the reason for the ability for them to close their door. There are other ways we could proceed. One, the most obvious is to not do anything, to your point, and move those 4 administrators I just named into the current space that is the Human Resources Department, because there are 4 offices there. But then that would require us to then move Human Resources to where Student Services would be. That means now there are certain people in that area that are displaced. So I think there's a domino effect of, on the surface, we felt the same way you feel on the surface in just presenting this. It doesn't feel right. But when you start considering all of the different circumstances, that's why we're presenting it to you.
Well, but doctors and lawyers these days are losing their offices and having to meet clients in conference rooms. I just can't see this. This will be the last comment I make, I promise. In a tight year where we only have $580,000 for capital spending, that we spend 60% of that on administrator offices in the administration building, to me, doesn't recognize that we're in a difficult year. Thank you.
Just before, Dr. Hoig, Mr. Phillips, do you have any thoughts or comments before I?
Yeah, I mean, I hear the concern. I guess I'm not familiar enough with the usage of space here. I guess I would like to see what that looks like. I mean, it seems like we're moving in a direction where more people are also, like, offices are being abandoned, and we're like, people are working part-time or hybrid or working partly from home. So I'm curious if there have been some other thoughts or shared drop-down spaces where you can have an office, but it's shared by a couple of people on certain days. I don't know enough about the kind of the flow of our staff, our administrators.
I want to be very careful again. This is not just administrators. There are people who work out of the Fisher building who are on a teacher contract, but they serve the entire district. And so the narrative of it's these high-paid administrators who need fancy offices, that's not the total perspective or narrative that's accurate. What I would share with you is that if you talked, and I would encourage you to talk to people who've worked at Fisher for a while, we've done a hodgepodge of placing people in this building for a while. I meet with the administrative assistants at Fisher on a monthly basis. One of them who's worked here for almost 20 years made the statement, I've moved 3 times. And the configuration of the space here has been difficult for years. So I think these are all good points. They're all fair. Again, the logic behind trying to keep together the student services, pupil services, family support team together was the rationale behind this proposal. And when you consider the type of topics that group works with, it is the most sensitive of all of our issues. Human resources is probably the next layer, but with all due respect to our colleagues in teaching and learning, what you described in terms of having cubicles applies more to that group than student services or human resources. You're dealing with highly sensitive things that will require the law. I always like to use the threshold or the matrix of who will call the attorneys more often. And it's typically human resources and student support. And that's the logic behind trying to create some type of workspace for them.
How much of the budget's HVAC?
I don't have it bid out yet. I mean, it was a budget number.
You've replaced them
we
before, so
created.
like
The rooftop unit itself, you're probably looking at $80,000 to $100,000,
which needs to be replaced.
And that is a mechanical thing that does need to be replaced. I know, and that's a large chunk of this.
Yeah.
The other bigger, another chunk of this would be like furniture, which, you know, no matter what, if it's cubicles or what have you, would have to be purchased on some level.
Sure.
For staffing, you know, in places as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
a third of it we have to do regardless.
At some point, that unit needs to be replaced. It continues to leak on us. We continue to have issues. It's leaking in the ceiling. I don't know if you guys have been to conference room E outside in the hallway, but the ceiling tiles get replaced like every month or two, and we have to try and address leaks. It's failing. That unit also has to be recharged with refrigerant every year when we start.
Look at the environment, man. Jeez. No, I'm kidding. I know it's not R32 anymore, but I hear you. Okay, thanks. That helps.
Sure.
Let's understand.
Ms. Fraley. So my next question, not knowing what I was going to say was going to light things up, is specific to the actual room. So I've spent a ton of time in conference room E over the last couple of months as a part of the Human Growth and Development Committee. I'm curious, in terms of that space from a collaborative professional development standpoint, if we've considered, you know, how often it's used, how many people are in there, because the conference room D across from your offices,
That's
A, that's much smaller.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, like what the possible loss is there in terms of not having that big open space.
It's significant. We will have to have meetings off campus, but I think it's a good thing in our community rooms, in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
That means district people will have to get into schools, and the byproduct of going into community rooms and utilizing that space will mean that people will be in buildings more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you. It seems like that proposal will need some work.
What work does it need?
Well, I don't see overwhelming support for this renovation. And I'm hearing more from the board that maybe we should take a relook at, that's probably not a word, or relook at other options. Some of the ideas that I am hearing are good ones. More connection time in the actual school buildings, more time and a space for collaboration in the district offices that we would lose. I hear you on the equipment side, which I don't think we could pause on. I think we need to replace the HVAC because that could end up being a more costly repair in the future if we don't do that. But utilization of the space, it seems we could take another look at that if the board wants to give that directive. I myself am concerned about some email exchanges that I had today on some of the ADA accessibility issues, for example, at our playgrounds and our play structures. And I just want to make sure that we are tackling those barriers to students accessing equipment. And like you're pointing out at Madison, that entrance, that's definitely, I don't even know if we could do something greater there at Madison to create a better even flow for how students are being dropped off. I know we've done some work on that in the past too. But so I would like to see us moving with the money we have to make sure that we have an audit of all of our facilities for ADA and making sure we have no barriers there for the things that we know of. And then working on the plan, as you talked about, to make sure that we have this mapping out of what we need to do going forward and how can we allot our funding to that as we move forward and phase it in and however we do that. So
That's fair. Greg, may I ask a question then? So in the absence of the facilities report, would you suggest that the replacement of the HVAC unit on the roof over conference room E is a high priority?
I think it's a priority in terms of having air conditioning for the space. However, if there is going to be looking into whether or not and doing more of an audit of turning that space into offices at some point, it would not make any sense to may not make sense to do it now, simply because it could be a different configuration. If we left it as a conference room and you just replace that unit, absolutely. But if you're ever to turn that into anything with offices or what have you, it's a complete reconfiguration of the HVAC system itself in there. Currently, how that's set up is a rooftop unit that serves the whole space as a whole. And the heating component is part of the boiler system here, which was designed to heat the space as one big space and not multiple spaces, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the direction or the unofficial direction that's being provided to us is that the consideration for office space should be taken off the capital improvement project list. My question, I want to be very specific. When you consider the needs in front of you and your team across the district, does the replacement of the HVAC unit over conference room E place itself as a priority? Or to what we've heard here, are there other areas in the district that require that has a direct impact on children that does need?
Sure. I would say that, if I'm looking in terms of for our students directly, replacing that rooftop unit just so that we have air conditioning for even conference meetings or what have you, does not directly.
It's a low priority.
Correct.
Okay.
We all are aware of the maintenance list that was created in 2017 with the study, which we're updating now. But I mean, there are things that have more of a direct impact to our students that, I would consider a higher priority.
Do you know what they are?
I don't have the entire maintenance list in front of me, but I mean, it's extensive from 2017.
Because I think what I'm hearing from the board is, so what are we asking them to choose against? So if it's not renovating conference room E into a office space, then what's next on your priority list? In other words, what were you not able to do because of that proposed project with conference room E?
I would say that it would be important to get that updated study and develop that plan to determine that, because we're 5 years out from what we did before. So
may I summarize your statement then?
You may.
Is your statement that you're not quite sure what those projects are, but you're confident that there are projects that are more of a higher priority than conference room E?
I could sit here for probably 2 hours and list everything I could think of off the top of my head. But those things need to be prioritized in a way that makes, and we have stakeholders involved in that process and giving us that input and feedback before we make that decision for this next 10 years. The decisions that were made in 2017 and 18 were made. That's what got us to here. But now it's important to look back at that before I weigh in on anything, putting one against the other.
So again, Greg, what I would say is what I'm hearing from you is that in the absence of a long-range facilities plan, when the question was, well, what do we need to do? Ideas can emerge. But if we step back and don't do this project, technically you are saying you just haven't gone through the process yet of prioritizing areas where we can impact our schools.
Correct, which is why we didn't intend on making a plan for the entire $3.9 million of capital expansion that does exist. It was just things that we.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so let me summarize. Is it possible that this $350,000 we could impact between now and the start of the school year? Some maintenance things, some things that need to be addressed that you already have on your plate. So we could have a direct impact starting the school year.
I really don't think it would make sense to put one thing against the other until we have that plan, until we have a master plan in place. So if
I think what he's saying is he knows there are areas that our schools need support in. He just doesn't have all of it in front of him and have gone through a process to prioritize it. But I like what you're saying, Ms. Mewville. I think what she's saying is she would prefer the district not spend the $350,000. Wait until you complete your list of prioritizing areas and then bring it back to the board.
Right, but that is what I was trying to say, is that's what I see doing. Like, okay, so if there's concern about spending it on this, then maybe we wait on that.
Sure.
And then we come back and say, hey, we could still do this.
No, but I want to clarify. Let me clarify. I don't have patience like that. I'll be very clear with you.
Okay.
I want impacts. If we don't have ADA accessibility, we have kids who can't get to play structures. Those things, I would like them immediately taken care of as soon as we know them. And if it requires us using this $350,000 or however you're going to list out those projects, let's get them done so we can do that for the start of the school year. And maybe sooner, because we have summer programming in many of these areas. So that's what I would like us to think about. And I do agree, we have to have some kind of long range planning, but we have to, I don't know how those funds are working, if we can pull them forward or if we have funding in this current year that we can still bridge that gap before the kids start school in the fall. I want us to get those projects done.
Sure. That's great.
Mr. Meyer.
Thank you for allowing me to speak again when I said I wouldn't. I support what you said, Mrs. Mewville, that ADA first. However you said it, I support it. I also think that if we come to September and we see enrollment is up, we look at things differently. If we come to September and we see enrollment is down, we might be glad we put this $350,000 on things that directly impact students, because it's tough times then if enrollment is down. But thank you.
Is there any other board comment then? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We're on to the next report, which I also think.
May I just
yes,
because I want to say for clarity's sake, administratively, we are going to pull that project off. And so when it comes back before you on June 27th, it will be minus that project.
Okay.
So thank you for the direction.
Will there be an added project?
Well,
directly on the lines of what
I'm hearing no.
Phil said.
So I think the other directive I'm hearing tonight is that you would like our buildings and grounds team to go through and do a very thorough job in identifying wherever we have ADA needs and place that as a priority. And so if there are needs from an ADA perspective to address it with those funds, that becomes the priority. I think that's what I'm hearing.
yes, student access barriers, if the board agrees. Okay.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So waste and recycle pickup service agreement.
Right. I think that's yours as well.
I'm just going to sit here for a little longer. this is pretty basic. The district has waste and recycle collection needs. Our contract is up as of June 30th with 2022. We put this out in for bid and solicited multiple bidders with 3 bidders responding. And I am recommending waste management at $65,860 for year number 1, with 5% increase in year number 2 and 5% increase in year number 3. I am recommending them as the recommended bidder on this and the lowest bidder.
Any other questions? Ms. Fraley.
Is there the possibility at a future date that we could also learn a little bit more about possible composting in the district?
We do currently, yes, I could explain what we have been working with, but yes, there is some composting that does exist.
Yep. I just know that there's a number of the environmental clubs at the high school and at the middle schools that are very interested in this. And I know just from our own experience composting, our garbage has come down to a point where it might only need to be picked up once a month compared to what ends up in recycling and compost. So as we're just thinking about our world and whatnot, I would love to ensure that the district is sort of, as we think about being a lighthouse district, like I think that's something that we could consider to really showcase, you know, the partnerships with Sodexo and all of these different things. So,
okay,
great. Any other comments or questions by the board on the agreement? Okay, then this agreement will be on our next agenda for approval. And I think we also have the next item, C, annual HVAC service agreement.
Correct. The district is also currently contracted with a company, which is a 1-year contract that ends in June 30th, 2022. The district went out to bid for essentially multiple bidders for a bank of 350 labor hours for any HVAC mechanical need within our district. Parts and materials costs are not included, but it was understood by all of the bidders that either A, we could purchase the parts through our own vendors, or B, they can purchase them on our behalf so we don't get that markup on material costs and all of that in parts. It is also understood by the bidders that I get a monthly tracking of their hours so that we can monitor that hour usage and make sure that it is sufficient for the school year and our needs. So we have been with Johnson Controls for quite some time, but Butters Fetting is the lowest bidder this year for a 1-year annual agreement. So I am recommending Butters Fetting as the recommended bidder and the lowest bidder.
Yes, Ms. Fran.
So if we've been with Johnson Controls, they find out that they were outbid. Do they get a chance to come back and say, we'll go lower?
That's not how the process works, to my
I know, but I just have to ask only because sometimes you know we're going for a 1-year bid, and so it's like new processes and new people, and the difference is $5,000. And like, do we feel really confident about the quality of this place compared to Johnson Controls?
There is something to be said for that. And if you remember last year around this time when I came to you, or maybe it was business manager at the time, but Johnson Controls was a little higher than the lowest bid, but this is, now we're talking $5,000 here, which is pretty significant. We are familiar with Butters Fetting. They have been on some of our projects. I mean, they have their issues just like anywhere else, but their responsiveness has been very good.
Okay.
So I am confident that for a 1-year deal to try them out. I know we have gone before. I was here when we first brought a company in and it did not work out so well, but it would be my intent actually that once the warranties fall off on some of these schools like Longfellow and Eisenhower that have new HVAC systems, so we wouldn't utilize any of these hours for those. Once those fall off, I would move to push more towards getting back to a 3-year agreement, which
Okay.
So that was probably a really long answer. I hope I answered it somewhere.
You did.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other board comment or questions? Well, thank you. And for all of those building and grounds, Dr. Means, did you have any?
No.
Okay. And we appreciate you taking those directives. Appreciate that. And we will again be back for this HVAC service agreement for approval on our next board agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you for the exchange. That was very helpful for us. And so thank you. And thank you, Greg, for
Thank you.
all for A, B, and C of number 8 of our agenda.
All right.
Okay.
Yes. We have a lot of work to do for sure. Thank you.
Sure.
The next subject is CLA audit.
Yes,
Dr.
ma'am.
Means?
Madam Chair, board members, community members, I believe it was in November of 2021 when the board directed administration to do a deeper financial dive on how we arrived at our situation with the procurement of Abbott as a service in the Wauwatosa School District. And so we engage with CLA, which is an auditing firm, to look at not only the procurement of that service, but more importantly, are we adhering to our financial policies? How does procurement and contracts get logged and secured in the district? And so that work started in December, and it was finalized. Mr. Brightman, during his transition, had the ability to look at the preliminary findings and to put together what I would call a corrective action plan from some of the things that were found. And so I believe Jamie has the ability, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. There are 2 officials from CLA, I think Raymond and Dan are on the line and have been given panelists authority to present. And so Ray, Dan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dr. Means. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Dan, are you on? Thanks. So Dan will share screen. He'll just share our report. But tonight, I want to start with introductions about ourselves. So Dan Ludwig and I'm Ray Emery. We've been with CLA for a number of years. Our career has been in this business of process and control assessments. We have done this work for a number of companies, cities, school districts, counties, all the way up to Fortune 500 companies. And then the other thing we do is we do Sarbanes-Oxley work for publicly traded companies. So a lot of that leading practice process and controls is in our background. So that's a little bit about Dan and I. I think what we would like to do is highlight a couple key aspects of our report.
Yeah.
Dan, are you able to share your screen?
I'm trying to find the feature here. Do you have it right?
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. The features. Okay.
Oh, there it is. Okay, I found it.
Got it? Good.
I can do that. Yep. Let me just quick pull it up. Okay.
So as you're bringing up the presentation, I mean, maybe you could bring us back a little bit more to why we did this and that we also have management objectives and management timeline for resolution.
Yes, ma'am. So again, during the midst of our challenge with trying to decipher why the district chose a certain program or how did the procurement process work, the board directed administration to do a deeper dive to determine how are we are we following our board policies around purchasing? Are we following our board policies around the adoption of curricular materials? I think you will quickly see in the report here that we don't have a strong structure right now in doing those things. We also were trying to decipher if there was something that went astray from a procedural standpoint in procuring the one academic program in particular, Avid. And I think what I learned from Dan and Ray, and we'll get into it in a second, is that the maturity level of our financial systems across the district are so immature. I think that's the language they use, is so immature that it was really hard to decipher if it was just an Avid issue or is this a larger, widespread district issue. And I think as you read the report, it's more the latter. But thank you for asking the question. This was initially an Avid issue to see how and why we found ourselves where we were with the procurement of Avid and how did it occur. I think it quickly unfolded into our colleagues from CLA identifying that there were larger challenges in the organization.
Thank you.
Yes,
and Mr. Emery and Mr. Ludwig.
Yes. Thank you. So again, we'll recap we'll highlight some key aspects of our report. We'll start with the scope of work. And I will say it was really around assessing the procure to pay, how we spend our money, the governance around that. It was really around the policy number 6320. So the scope was really to assess design of controls and process, and then assess their maturity. And we'll get to that in a moment. But some of the key areas that we looked at is new vendor setup and maintenance. We find a lot of times if there's a segregation of duty risk or not properly handled from a segregation of duty, that there's potential for fraud and abuse there. Purchase order approval, delegation of authority, that's your policy of who can approve and at what level. Capital expenditure budgeting, we took a look at that, the approval and what's capitalized, and you're all talking about that this evening. Invoice approval, and again, segregation of duties. If not done well, again, a lot of organizations can experience fraud and abuse with improper segregation of duties. Overarching theme of our conclusions in procure to pay is that we would describe the district's procure to pay maturity as benchmarked against leading practices. We define that as, and I'll give you the definition. Few processes are defined and success depends on individual efforts and heroics. That is a leading practice definition of what is called initial maturity. Overarching most of the processes that we looked at and we benchmark against those leading practices, all but of 7, 6 were in this initial maturity level. Okay, and then what does that create? Well, if you have that level, it creates a lack of consistent adherence to policy because people don't know what they are. They're not consistently communicated, cascaded down to the rank and file. If it's not documented, there's nothing to refer back to. Again, undocumented policy and procedures, people are just doing the best they can under the circumstances. We have 7 recommendations that are in our report. I won't cover all of them, but the purpose of those recommendations is to move the district in their procure to pay up 2 levels of maturity. And the definition of the level that we think you should be at is what is defined as policies and processes are documented, standardized, and updated. The beauty of that is people know what to do. If changes need to be made, there's a process, a controlled process to change those. And if you have transition in your staff, there's the learning curve. I'll say the training for new people in transition is you're able to accomplish that. So Dan, I'm thinking we'll highlight the standard operating procedures finding.
Oh, you want me to drop down to the findings?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Sure. Okay.
So, some key points here. The district has implemented procure to pay policy number 6320. The management, the senior leader management team has knowledge about this. Again, this knowledge, this procedural and process and controls is not documented, and therefore it's hard to cascade down to the people who have to execute against this policy. And typically this policy number 6320, one of the things our recommendation is that you all take a look at that and make some adjustments to it, taking into account some of the standard things that we would expect to be in place regarding that policy. It'd be vendor selection process, having more definition about that, purchasing responsibilities and the limits related to those, purchasing, who can approve those. Invoice approval, the payment process, defining that in more sufficient detail. If you're using outside legal services, what's the contract review process? And then third-party providers, how do you select those? The other thing that a lot of people are doing when they engage third-party vendors, they get audited with SOC 1 audit reports. So, the leading practice is now moving to reviewing those reports to see if your vendor is, in ship shape from a process and controls perspective. And other things around certificates of insurance. So there's, that's just a summary list. But the one thing I would say, our recommendation is that management should document and develop that set of standard operating procedures that the district procurement department could use. That'll ensure consistency. Management's response is they agree, and they are in the process of addressing this by October 1 of this year. The other, again, I'm not covering all 7. The other one is that I wanted to highlight is new vendor setup and vendor maintenance. So, the district has assigned specific employees the ability to set up new vendors in the Skyward system, but the district has not developed a process and controls to manage this new vendor setup and changes. This is where many organizations experience fraud. People set up fraudulent vendors. If their segregation of duties allows them to process payments, they can set up a fraudulent vendor, process a payment that's nefarious and that could accrue benefits to them. Management agrees with the findings, and their response is they're prepared to make changes by July 1 of this year. Segregation of duties. One of the things the district hasn't developed is a segregation of duty conflict matrix. All that is who has access to what in Skyward, and based on their access, do they have conflicts? So if I can set up a new vendor in Skyward, if I can process a payment, if I can approve an invoice, there's the potential for fraud right there. One of the things that we highlight here, leading practices, and this is internal controls 101, but segregation of duties, you want to do a couple things. And Dan, I'm moving to the things that you can't have as your access. So the ability to execute a transaction, right. You should have the ability to execute, approve, as well as have custody of assets and the ability to record a transaction. And then, the other thing is if the worst of the worst would also be having the ability to reconcile accounts and things of that nature. That segregation of duty matrix, we're saying you would want to be reviewing who has access to what and making sure that they don't have 2 or more combinations of those 4 things.
Do you want me to switch down to that segregation duties comment, Ray?
Yeah, please. Thanks,
I'm
Dan.
sorry. Sure.
I'm having you jump around. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Yeah.
So again,
here it is.
Yeah, and as you can see, the 4 bullets there: the ability to execute, approve, custody, ability to record, and reconciliation of transactions. So 2 or more of those together is a bad thing. And we're just saying management should review who has the access in Skyward, and then make sure that there's not those, what we call high-risk conflicts. Management has agreed with those findings, and they are making, their plan is to remediate and address the findings by October 1. There's more here, but I thought those were noteworthy to highlight. Dan and I would like to just pause here. We hit a lot of points, covered a lot of territory, but would like to pause and just field questions at this point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions? No? Okay. Okay, Mr. Meyer.
I just want to say thank you for the work. It's very helpful.
Yeah, it was, and just for, for some more framing, everything is spelled out with the management response and timeline and the resolutions. And it's just, thank you. It was a very thorough audit, and we appreciate that. So I am also happy to see that there are training and cross-training elements in this, because we have had a lot of turnover, and I mean, it seems as though some of the knowledge was lost, and obviously there weren't work instructions that were consistently followed. So, that was kind of wrapped in to these responses.
And the one thing I would add to that point, with COVID and people working remote, and now with the Great Resignation, this documenting processing controls for transition is even more important now than ever.
Mr. Brightman, you had some comments?
Yeah, we don't have the remote work directly involved, but we do have a transition as of June 1st. 4 of our 7 business office staff are new to the district. And so as part of that transition, we're setting up the Skyward approval chains and the indexes, as was referenced in the report. So we are updating these as a natural course, but also following the recommendations of this report. So the 2 items that you see listed as a July 1 target date are well underway and will be completed by the end of this week at the latest. So, and that's setting up just not simple, but a hierarchy of approvals, and whether that's vendor changes or additions, or if that's approving the purchase process through the line, those approval chains are being set up and are mostly set up at this point. So we're already on track with that one. The other ones that are set for October 1st and November 1st, we'll likely have those in place much sooner than that, as we're looking at just really updating the written procedures, making sure they're clear, the staff understands them, that we do the training on them that's prescribed and recommended, that we set up a schedule for ongoing training and ongoing reminders for staff in these areas. And then that we just do internal audits. Part of my job will be to look at that, and Gwen Hustline also, that we are following procedures that we say we're going to do. And so it comes down to being that simple with it, I guess. So, I do thank CLA also for the report. I think it was very well done, and we'll be able to use this.
Thank you for those comments, Ms. Fraley.
So I think you're touching on what my question was about. So this was incredibly helpful, very thorough. Now we know where the issues are. You can't solve problems that you don't know. But in terms of, like, I don't want us to have to do this every other year, you know what I mean? Internal audit that's like secret shopper or undercover boss, like where you're gonna throw something in there to see if it gets caught, or you're gonna check a process. Like, how often does that happen?
So we'll set up a process to, on the vendor side, for example, looking at a list of vendors that we add over the course of months or a year, whatever we decide the time frame is, and looking at those vendors, doing a cross check to make sure they're legitimate, that the addresses match a legitimate source outside of what's shown in our system, looking at who has control to add the vendors and then approve the addition of that vendor, so it's not one person doing both of those roles. So it's not overly complicated. I can say in 20 years, I've never had a purchase or a vendor questioned, and that's because there's been a procedure in play to have those types of cross checks embedded in what we do every day. So
I think just from a board perspective, we've been in the trust business and now we're in the verify business. So my days of having someone say to me, like, we did this is actually no longer good enough because we've been burned. So just so you know, it's not questioning you. It is us doing our due diligence to make sure that when you tell us that you are doing these things, that we actually have the information that shows us that they're happening.
yeah, part of this too is our annual financial audit. We'll go a little deeper on this topic also at our request and make sure that we're doing what we say we're doing. So there's that third party check at least annually to make sure that that's happening. There's also monitoring that happens on all the federal grants that we use, and we'll use those requirements for all of our internal purchasing use because those federal requirements are very stringent. And if we align everything to that, we'll be in good shape also.
Thank you for your statement. I'm close to completing my first year in the district, and your statement is critical because it can't just be one voice that is saying that to staff. So I want to just thank you, the board, for saying you have been in the trust business, but you're now going to verify. And I think it's going to be important for us all to be consistent with it and sending that message. But thank you.
Mr. Meyer?
This is just me. The good business people expect to be reviewed. Good business people expect to be brought before these kinds of reviews. And good business people appreciate being trusted, but they don't expect to be trusted. That the process is what we trust. And our faith and fidelity to the process, the good process, that's how we live. So I personally don't mind people double checking what I do. Fine, that's makes me look better. Because if you double check and I did it well, it's well known. It's known then. So and nobody should worry that they're not trusted. No, if there's a review and your work is examined, that's your opportunity. And I don't mean this is one of these euphemism things. It's like, no, that really is an opportunity to show that you did your job well. Thanks.
Thank you. We also appreciate our guests, Mr. Emery and Mr. Lodwig. So probably, I know that work instructions are labor intensive, and maybe you check in this fall to see how it's going.
We certainly can. And thank you for the opportunity to work with you all. And I will just say what you just heard from the leaders at the district here. That's good tone at the top, meaning they are responding quickly. It's refreshing to see that quick of a response to our findings. We normally, in many cases, we don't see quite that quick of a response. So good tone at the top.
Yeah. I have one comment. There is a board deadline of October for some work in here. So I want to make sure we're all aware of that as a board. Yeah. It's not all on Mr. Breckman. Yeah.
Well, then we might have to have a check-in in August.
Yeah, we'll be bringing periodic updates as needed to the board, definitely, on this.
Okay, thank you.
Very good.
Thank you again.
Well, we will take our leave, and you all have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye. Bye.
The next topic is Argo Translation Agreement. Dr. Means?
Yes, ma'am. Argo Translation Agreement is simply, that's the organization that we utilize to translate school district materials into different languages. We've seen an increase in the need to translate our materials. In some cases, we were not translating materials, and our multilingual teachers asked that we be more diligent about this work. We have staying consistent with policy 6320. We have now approached the $20,000 threshold, and that's why we're bringing this to the board for your approval to allow us to move forward with this agreement.
Is there any other board discussion or questions? Seeing none, then I guess we would expect this to come back in the 27th.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, for approval. And the next topic was the Echelon apartment lease for July 2022 through June 2023.
Madam Chair, I'll let Mr. Brighton speak to this agenda item.
Thank you. I've been working to help bring this one forward. So we do lease an apartment for the Special Education Transition Services Program. And that's a program where special education students receive real life apartment, home life setting, doing laundry, dishes, living in a home, operating through a home environment. We do have a unique arrangement where Mandel, the developer and property owner, does subsidize this somewhat for us. It's about a $2,000 monthly lease, and $500 of that is subsidized by Mandel. So it's a one-year renewal for July 1 through June 30th. That we're asking the board to consider for approval at the next meeting is a renewal of the current year lease that we have in place.
Thank you. Board members? Okay, thank you very much for that update. And that will bring us to community comment on business services reports. Is there any community comment on all of the report items we discussed this evening?
Hi, I'm BJ Ermans, 2749 North 75th Street. I will be brief. I want to thank you all for your comments and caveats for the creation of offices within the conference room. There are so many more modern ideas. And I recall in a number of the listening sessions that I have attended that parents were very much interested in having some of these positions be much more visible in the schools. And whether that may not be a permanent office, but to use some of that space. And this would be a direct answer to their input. So thank you all for what you said on that.
Thank you. Is there any online comment?
Yeah, we have two hands raised. Todd Dahlgren, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Yes, Todd Dahlgren, 1647 North 122nd. Just to Ms. Fraley's comment earlier on the composting, when my kids were at McKinley, there was a very strong and robust composting program run by some excellent staff who did so largely on their personal time. And there had been a desire to try to expand that to more schools in the district, but the feedback I had received from staff was that there didn't seem to be much support of that from Fisher in providing resources to expand that. So if there is a desire to bring composting to other schools, I think there's certainly an environment where it could succeed, and it would just need the proper level of support. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have one more. Deb Falk-Palak, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Thank you. Yes, this is Deb Falk-Palak. I don't know if Mr. Greg Chasinski is in the room yet, but I just wanted to thank him for his recognition at, I believe he said it was at Madison, where the curb cut is in relationship to the door. Now, I personally am not familiar with what that looks like. So also thank you to whichever parents brought that forward as an issue. And I think some of my colleagues on the city's Disability Commission are still in the room too. And when this gets looked at, I'm wondering, Greg, if possibly some of us could work with Greg about where the placement of the curb cut is. Now, certainly there are all sorts of factors as to where those could be placed, but something came up in the parking lot at Fisher on the west side with where the curb cut is in relationship to the accessible parking spots. And Ms. Alexander actually brought this up, and I think she's right about it. So I think we would certainly welcome the opportunity. This would be something, a plug for my disability committee, that we could work on, but certainly be willing to talk about why placement is important and would be more than willing to help with that. With the Argo agreement, something must have changed with what's on board docs, because the actual bill was on there earlier and I don't see it. And I was actually very surprised where the recommendation says approve agreement with an invoice dated May 9th for almost $12,000. And it was for one IEP. I'm hoping somebody looks at that. It was being translated from English to Vietnamese. If that is true, that it's just one document, that seemed really pricey for $12,000. And I'd encourage the district, once again, when these things are put forward, to not use names, not use initials, that it can be publicly viewed, because now what was uploaded, it goes into confidentiality and privacy when that is done. And thirdly, with the Echelon apartment, I hope you do approve that. It's a wonderful site, but really what's so important about it is it's accessible. And I'd like to thank former board member Sean Rowland and current board member Mike Meyer, who really took this on to say we no longer can be operating a program for kids with disabilities in an inaccessible location. So please, and I encourage you to approve that lease agreement, or any agreement that we're going to have accessible space for our students. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I don't see any others in the room. I would just add that we do have a connection point with Independence First, and those conversations, and that's happening. And Greg will be attending that meeting in early July.
Yes, he is.
So thank you again for your engagement. Our next set of reports is for teaching and learning. The first topic is a Chromebook purchase. Come on up.
Ms. Beth Kimmel has assumed the role and responsibility of becoming our instructional technology coordinator. We're really pleased and overjoyed that she's taken on this additional responsibility. I guess the first test is to see if she needs Tim's help or not.
No,
if she's our instructional technology coordinator.
All right,
boy.
one more step. I was avoiding the Zoom era still.
But you may ask the question, what is an instructional technology coordinator, and what's the difference between that and what we do with other elements of technology? The term instructional technology is meant to help teachers and instructors understand how to utilize technology in a way that it can expand teaching and learning. Technology is the same as a pencil or a pen. It's a material. But if you don't know how to leverage it in a way to make the material come alive for students, it can be something that doesn't really expand instruction at all. The role of Ms. Kimmel is to make sure that all of our teachers have access to her, so we can make technology something that is just not a thing, but it enhances what we do in the classroom. So Ms. Kimmel, thank you for being so patient with us, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Means. So just to begin speaking with the kind of the vision that Dr. Means was even sharing with you, and where we're going with instructional technology. The vision of instructional technology in Wauwatosa is to affirm and advance the Wisconsin information and technology literacy standards in all classrooms to transform every student's educational experience, enabling activities previously impossible in the classroom. And I'm just bringing to you today a model that is used amongst school districts or communities in the education field and others, but to looking at how we take technology in our classrooms, and we move it in different ways to transform that learning for our students. I do want to just preface this that we don't all live in that redefinition stage all day, every day. We don't have the time to do that, but we do want our students to have access to that type of learning throughout their time in Wauwatosa and within each year. So this is kind of a guiding document that leads us to some of that experiences that we want to have in our classroom and kind of setting the tone of where we're going and what I'm presenting to you today. I have linked in there some examples for you to see what might some of these things look like for you in the classroom as well. But simple as substitution, looking at, I'm no longer writing with paper and pencil, but I'm now typing something, to something like redefinition of I'm now traveling on a field trip and seeing the places across the world, but also speaking to students across the world or sharing my thoughts with them and having a different audience than I might just be presenting in my classroom. So really being able to redefine that learning. So this is just kind of where we're beginning from that and that model that we're looking towards. To give you some background on where we are using our technology and specifically Chromebooks with our students right now, this is the resources that you see are presented or are used with our students from digital learning tools. Some of you might have seen different things like this, like Dreambox or BrainPop or typing programs. We have implemented Canvas 2 years ago as our learning management system, so our students use devices to access that. GoGuardian is a program that allows our teachers to actually monitor our students when they're on our school-issued devices, from blocking a site or only allowing them to go to one specific site and not open up other tabs. We also use them for online testing or textbooks, different tech tools that might be available from like video creation or photography materials, and also then our Google Suite, so Google Docs and everything that comes in the Google world. Also, you'll see on here is our average daily usage by grade, which I'll reference again. But you can see that throughout our school district, we have students utilizing this, but the highest usage is actually happening in our middle schools. And important to note as we kind of move through this presentation. So some of the goals that we're looking at in purchasing additional Chromebooks this coming year is we would like to continue our secondary Chromebook rotational model that has been a yearly model. I'm sorry, actually, can I pause for a moment? Because I didn't, would be remiss to say, Jamie Price is floating above us in Zoom world, and he was my co-partner in a lot of this. So I'm sorry, Jamie, I know you like hiding in the back, but I'm calling you out. So as if there are technical questions, he's our guy and my partner in all of this. So sorry, wanted to come back.
Actually, I did want to mention one thing, Beth, on that previous slide.
Yes.
Don't think that utilization number means they only have their Chromebooks open 40 minutes a day. The utilization data is taken from actual activity. So if they're moving the mouse or typing something. So what you see there is actual input time, but the actual daily usage is greater because, you know, when they're reading, it's not being registered as interactivity. To
you. He's out there. So why we are purchasing or looking to purchase is to continue that yearly rotational model. Maintain this current distribution in our 6th and 9th grade. They are currently receiving a new device as a 6th grader or a 9th grader and carrying those devices through them. 8th graders would turn them back in and reused. 9th graders carry them through their high school career, and when they graduate, they can choose to return them, and we often will use their parts. Or if they're still in good standing, they could be used in other buildings, or they're welcome to keep them at that point, which leads us to the fact that Chromebooks have about a 4 to 5 year life cycle. So this is kind of a natural maintenance purchase that needs to happen as far as the life cycle. We currently have 27% of our inventory that is towards the end of its life cycle, which is 1,884 Chromebooks, moving towards that end of life cycle. So the other goal that we are pushing towards is that we also know that these Chromebooks, and like the previous slide mentioned, and how we are using them and utilizing them in all of those different ways, but also to push that vision forward that I presented to you initially. For us to be able to provide that type of access to our students, they need to have some sort of device to be able to get to that. So we're looking at that. I also have on the slide here that we're going to begin a JK through 2 and a K-12 special ed device audit. And I'll speak to that a little bit more, but looking at also a K-12 overall audit in future years. So I'm going to speak to that soon. Jamie, anything before I move on?
No, you're doing an awesome job, Beth.
We're already a great team.
I'll go back to reading now.
So with when we looked at this purchase, we did a SWOT analysis, and I'll briefly go through. This is the one that we are recommending to you, but I do have 3 other examples. So we are recommending to purchase for 6th and 9th grade. And some of the things that I'd like to point out to you on here, the strengths are that we will be able to continue a model of individual access to devices in 1st through 12th grade. And we would be able to provide new devices for middle school students and high school that have the highest daily usage. We did recognize an opportunity of maintaining that manageable life cycle rotational model that will not present too great of a threat to that predictable budget moving forward, and knowing that we're continuing that maintenance cycle and not needing to drastically make a large purchase because we have lost out. You'll notice then that we have also some weaknesses in there, that middle school students are rough on devices. That's definitely a conversation that we're currently looking at, and what can we do to prevent some of that. But that's one of the weaknesses we've identified. And then also we have recognized that there is a threat of just knowing that if we don't get these products in time with where we are, that we would have to shift and make some different model work for that time, but that's kind of out of our hands in shipping supplies. So that's our recommendation as far as purchasing for 6th and 9th, to be able to continue those. Just so that you can see, we did look at purchasing for 5th, 6th, and 9th. A weakness of this is that it is at a much higher or a higher cost. We would be able to continue that individual device between 1st through 12, and elementary would then also gain newer devices through our current model, or through that 6th and 9th grade purchase. They are still getting newer devices and devices that are not reaching the end of their life cycle. So elementary does still have access to working and optimal Chromebooks. But we also recognize that that was a larger cost and not necessarily a need for this time. We did look at just purchasing devices for 9th grade, and that redistributing some of the devices that we currently have at 1st and 2nd grade based on usage data, and then creating more of a shared model in the lower grades like JK and kindergarten. And you can see that this one just presented a lot more threats to our system as far as the damage rate and failure to return devices by 8th grade students. Some of those presented an opportunity of would we have enough to actually be able to support this? And then finally, we looked at absolutely no purchases. It is possible, but it does present the opportunity or the potential for, if we have high damage rates, that we might not be able to meet the demand of our student need. We don't know what purchasing is like as far as shipping. So if we did need to make a purchase because we did not have that, we don't know if we would have enough to cover where we are. That would maintain only individual student devices in 3rd through 12th grade, creating a shared model. But based on our data, we saw that that was also applicable or could happen. So those were the 4 that we did look at while reviewing for this. Anything you'd like to add, Jamie, before I move on?
Are you going to, I think it might be worthwhile pointing out that pre-pandemic, the plan was to go to middle school 1-to-1 as well, just because of the demand there. But then the pandemic hit, of course, and that was all thrown out the window. So it was actually around, I believe, March of 2019, because it was, December 2019. I think it was March 2020 when the pandemic hit, right? Where we all went home for a while. But around the December timeline, plans were developing there, because the middle school principals were asking, can we go 1-to-1 at the middle schools? Because the shared model that they had at the time, with carts being shared between the classrooms, the demand for those carts was so high that if we had provided more carts, we would have actually had more devices than kids in the school. So it was, a strong financial reason to go 1-to-1 at the middle schools. But the pandemic sort of threw that all out the window when we had to go 1-to-1 over a weekend to everyone in the district. So this is kind of circling back to that, but very strongly with teaching and learning and instructional technologies input into what we should do moving forward.
Thank you. So that kind of our action plan of looking at if this does move forward would be to, we did already vet out Chromebook bids. So we have that bid and that is linked for you as well, would be to purchase Chromebooks after our next board meeting upon approval. The summer, once they would arrive over shipping, would be inventory and format devices, knowing that that could possibly, with shipping delays, be a little bit later, but the goal would be to make sure, and then with the start of the year, deploy those 2 Chromebooks to students. Along with that, then you see the ongoing would be that audit and pilot of JK through 2, but also special education devices in that time, which leads me kind of to the next engagement and feedback cycle. We would continue to look at that overall usage data to make sure that these devices are being utilized with ongoing collaboration with in conversations with our teachers. But then the device audit that I mentioned earlier, we have gotten feedback from teachers and from in many different fields of why a Chromebook and is this the right device for what I need? So when you think of our youngest learners and they were thrown into using Canvas and in the pandemic, and asking them to show their thinking was incredibly difficult. It worked wonderful for our secondary students, but our young learners really struggled. Where would a device that allowed a touch interaction be more applicable to a student like that? And then you hear similar things from our special ed department as well, needing different tools or access. And so this, by maintaining our current cycle, we would be able to have the time to really look and pilot and provide time for our teachers to try out new things and our students to be able to get feedback to then purchase the correct device. The other part of this then also is to develop that instructional technology improvement plan. So you saw the vision in the beginning, but we actually just got some feedback from our staff in a survey about just overall instructional technology. So using that data to be able to establish some goals and action plans to be able to monitor our opportunities for our staff and our students. The budget of what we're looking at, we would be purchasing the Dell Chromebooks 3100s, which Jamie can speak to if needed, but these are currently deployed in many of our classrooms. So this is the bulk of our Chromebooks that we have now. Also the Chromebook education upgrade and then a case with them. So there's the total expenditures of $300,160. The staffing that would be, it would be our computer support specialist that we currently have in buildings and also myself. So we would not require any additional staffing with this purchase. And recommendation to your school board would be to approve this expenditure to maintain our current life cycle of our devices while also empowering myself to audit our current systems and create actionable goals towards the vision.
Thank you. Yes. Very thorough. Any board member questions or comments?
I have a question. I saw the quotes from, it's almost 90 days old. Given the, inflationary and supply chain pressures, have you checked in with CDW to see if those are still good?
Jamie and I just had that conversation today.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I actually reached out to the reseller before and told them that, it was coming to the board now and, coming back for approval on the 27th. And they seem to be fine with that.
Okay, cool.
Unless you want to approve it tonight, but wishful thinking, right?
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Kimmel and Mr. Price. Our next topic then is the proposed contract between the Wauwatosa School District and Career Tech Solutions.
And Madam Chair, board members, community members, Dr. Barmo, our Chief Academic Officer, will address this issue. Welcome, Dr. Barmo.
Hello.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I will be talking about a proposed contract with Career Tech Solutions. So back in 2016, the Wauwatosa School District reached out to Career Tech Solutions and began a partnership. Back in 2016, this was mainly to revitalize the technology education or tech ed programming in the Wauwatosa School District. In 2016, during that 2015-2016 school year, there was no tech ed offerings at Wauwatosa East High School, and there were 2 classes being run at Wauwatosa West. So it was really seeking guidance and a partnership to be able to rectify that curricular area. Last summer, the business department went through an RFP to see about who might be able to continue to help support this. And Career Tech Solutions came back as the only vendor to respond to the RFP. And in that RFP, there was an opportunity to exercise a 1-year renewal. So that is what we are looking to bring to your attention this evening for approval, potentially in 2 weeks. And the contracting fee is $50,000. And that is the same fee that the district paid in the 2020-2021 school year, which was the last full 12-month contract with Career Tech Solutions. And I just want to point out this graphic, and again, it references the 2015-2016 school year where we did, the school district did reach out to Career Tech Solutions to begin that partnership. And you can see the growth that the district has made specifically around technical education, technology and education, tech ed, since the partnership with Career Tech Solutions in that particular category. So here are some different items that the Career Tech Solutions has assisted with since the time of the partnership. I won't read all of them to you, but again, it really has been about development of teacher capacity. When we think about instructional coaches in math and English language arts, really Career Tech Solutions has served as that coach specifically in our career and technical education setting, specifically around, again, tech ed. The partnership objectives continue as such. So the Department of Public Instruction recognizes these 6 different curricular areas for career and technical education. We have 5 of the 6 in play. We are currently do not have any offerings around agriculture or natural resources, but we do have the other 5 at play. And per the Department of Public Instruction, in order for what they call pathways, in order for a pathway to be healthy, it has to have 2 of the following elements. And then in order for a particular pathway to be eligible for the Carl Perkins grant, there has to be 3 of these in existence. So this graphic here gives a very high-level overview of what is currently at play when we think about the different pathways. So for example, our family and consumer science pathway at the very top, we do have a sequence of courses that exists. And then we do have a CTSO, which I always have to look back and remember what it is, but a career and technical student organization related activities. So they have Pro Start, which is a cooking competition that our students engage in. So you can see where our level of health is with our different pathways and opportunities for students in these particular areas. Going back to the 2015-2016 school year and thinking about technology and engineering or tech ed and the level of health that now exists in that area, obviously that has grown. And for example, the Skills USA is brand new this year as the CTSO. And then we also are in the very infancy stages of the industry certification. So the career connections level 3 certifications that you see there, that is also very, very new to our organization. So very excited about the opportunities that we can continue to foster for our students. So while it has grown, what has been the return on investment for students and what has been the impact? So currently, as of this school year, 3.5% of our student population is going to be graduating with industry certification. 8% of them are going to be graduating with a work-based learning experience. That's mostly through youth apprenticeship and some of our launch strands. And then percentage of students that are graduating having earned dual enrollment credits. So that right now mostly is for our students that are accessing advanced levels of math through Calc 3. That's where the vast majority of that percentage is actually coming in and not necessarily related to our career and technical education services. So as we think about a continued partnership with Career Tech Solutions, some of the strengths that continued partnership would have is the Career Tech Solutions has had a strong positive partnership with us for a number of years. We do have a new academic and career coordinator in Mrs. Cindy Carter, who is transitioning from the school counselor role into the academic and career coordinator position. We did lose Miss Tina Cook as our innovation specialist, who had been really partnering with Career Tech Solutions to bring some of that growth that we have seen. So we do have some transition there. We do have transition in our family and consumer sciences as well. That's part of that, that one pathway that we were looking at of that family and consumer science pathways. We have had some staff turnover there. So we're going to need to look to rebuild that health. Same with health and science. We're going to have some staff turnover there as well that we'll need to look at how do we support that. And traditionally, we have also had turnover in our business and information technology, not at both high schools, but there has been movement in at least at Wauwatosa East High School. And so just having some additional stability to continue to grow and build on these current percentages for students. Also, just want to think about we want currently students have to earn 23 credits in order to graduate from our school district. So I like to think of these key performance indicators as 23 plus. What else are they going to have in their toolbox that will make them college career ready? And this is one way in which we can monitor whether or not we are helping students leave us with a more robust tool belt and not just 23 credits and a high school diploma. We want to help make them more employable. An obvious weakness to this is the financial commitment of $50,000. We have utilized the Perkins grant in the past to help offset some of that funding, and we have worked with Mr. Dixon around identifying again the Perkins grant, but then Act 59 funds to again continue to offset that financial responsibility of $50,000. This is a really great opportunity for us to expedite those opportunities to offer students the services that we've identified with the key performance indicators of the industry certification, work-based learning opportunities, and dual enrollment. So by having the partnership, we'll be able to expedite that process, especially amidst the staff turnover. And should we choose not to partner with Career Tech Solutions, and we need time to seek out an alternative support, and it would potentially delay our ability to make gains in those performance indicators. So it is the request of the school district that Career Tech Solutions offers consultation to the academic and career coordinator in the district and helping that individual, Mrs. Carter, develop a CTE program growth plan that will be measured by the key performance indicators. So would be a big part of the work. Work with Mrs. Carter on executing the action steps that will be developed within that growth plan, and then also continue to maintain assistance with the bulleted items that I went over or showed you and you have access to in the background. So continuing to be that mentor, are that coach for our teachers beyond tech ed, but starting to also move into those other areas where we are going to have some staff turnover. So the recommendation to all of you is to consider approving a contract with Career Tech Solutions in the amount of $50,000 for the moving from July 1, 2022 to July 30th of 2023. And looking to improve CTE programming and improve upon those key performance indicators, as I have mentioned. And with that, let me take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Marble. Board members, you have the floor. Ms. Fraley.
Do you have projections as to the number of students that we expect to take advantage of these classes next year? Like, you know, I know it sort of ebbs and flows. Like last year, there was like one student that ended up with the apprenticeship, and this year we had so many at that presentation. So do we expect to see an increase in the number of students based on what the high schools see right now?
Based to see, yes, I do expect to see an increase. So you in 2022, 2023, you can, sorry, that was hidden before by the Zoom link, but yes, these are the projected numbers for next year. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I would like to see this program grow and keep growing.
Thank you.
Our next topic, where are we? College Board invoice for AP exam fees. Dr. Means?
Yes, ma'am. You will see that the invoice is from Wauwatosa West. It's simply the students paid for their AP exams, and Wauwatosa West collected all the fees. Now we need to process the invoice. It's a very similar conversation to a few weeks ago. We had a similar conversation of the district was the way station, if you will, for the submission of fees. It's not there. These are not district dollars that have been utilized. These are students who have paid for their AP exams. We're simply seeking to pay the invoice.
Thank you. Any board questions?
What's the average cost per student?
I don't know.
Okay. I can find out. Oh, 87. Let's look at unit prices.
But the average price is really it's a good question, because a lot of our students take multiple AP exams. Yeah. So that average cost, I think for a certain segment of our students, they're taking at least 2 to 3 AP examinations. That cost starts to increase.
Do we have additional supports for students that, like families, that could be an issue?
We do provide those supports if the students come forward and ask.
So have to do extra steps?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't share with you that during our strategic planning process, this has emerged as a potential, to Ms. Munfeld's point, of an ongoing long-range cost. I believe the steering committee will ask the board to consider.
Makes sense.
If I might interrupt, it's $96 per exam.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
May I?
Yes, Mr. Meyer.
18 years ago, the so-called TOSA committee looked at the concept of fees, and it was widely thought back then that a lot of people out of pride just won't ask for help. And any way we can, we need to try to make it so they don't. Yeah, I don't know how, but you know what I'm saying.
Yes,
it's like, and one committee member said, I wouldn't take help for my child even. He was a successful businessman. So to be helped if we can. Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Thank you, board. Is there any community comment on the teaching and learning reports? I see one in the room.
Hello, BJ Arments, 2749 North 75th Street, member of the Commission for Persons with Disabilities. And we also would really like to see an increase in the technology program. I would like to find out if the key performance indicators, if those numbers are all regular ed students. And also, and if we could have a breakdown of those, I think would be valuable. It would also be terrific when they are talking about the company building business partnerships to build business partnerships for students with disabilities. You might have seen that some of the large computer companies, IBM, Microsoft, I know, have special programs for hiring people on the autism spectrum, and they are finding a lot of excellent jobs that can be done at home too for people with a lot of different disabilities. And it would be terrific if we could have the same contract, the same company, including making those types of business partnerships, because they sound like they're doing a terrific job for us. So we could expand it to all the kids, or so we hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Any online comments?
Yeah, we have one hand raised. Deb Falk-Palak, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Thank you, Deb Falk-Palak. I do see that the background, this company has helped with developing business partnerships. And I am wondering who helps to develop the business partnerships for our high school students and our 18 to 21 students. If you talk to the transition coordinator in our district, we have lost several of our companies that used to provide internship sites for our students to be working with teachers and staff to be learning. So could somebody help figure out if this contract, could it be inclusive of our children with disabilities in the district when we talk about developing partnerships, or ask, really who does that? Particularly because we've lost some of those companies. So that's my feedback on that. And also Miss Fraley might remember this because I think you helped me with this. MATC does have a program. I know I was in a presentation through work, and Elmbrook was really taking advantage of it quite a bit through Launch. I know we partner with Elmbrook for Launch, if I'm not mistaken, but MATC does have, and they were heavily and probably still are recruiting students with disabilities in their CNC program. So I would encourage, and I still do have the contact for the professor there, somebody in our district to really make that connection, because they purposely and intentionally, and there are 2 universities, or I should say colleges in the country that currently have this program for folks on the autism spectrum, and one is in our backyard at MATC. So don't forget our kids with disabilities and these business partnerships. And if we don't know the answer with who's developing those partnerships, let's make sure that we can encourage employment. It's a group that has the lowest employment rate of any group, and we want to ensure that we're giving them every possibility that we can to improve their academic and career planning outcomes. Thank you.
There are no more hands raised.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate those comments. And we now have pupil and family support reports.
I'll try to be succinct, Madam Chair. Board members, you will notice every year, annually, there's a contract between the Walton School District and the Cooperative Educational Service Agency, better known as CESA 1. The actual contract summary sheet was attached to this agenda item. The main cost points are for alternative placements. So you will see under 3101 Turning Point Elementary, that's an alternative school placement for students who need a different type of learning environment. Or Project Success is again a different alternative learning environment. You'll note that both of those are 4 seats each. Unfortunately, what we've seen across the metro area with all the different school districts in CISA 1, that those seats fill quickly. And sometimes even with us having those seats, we're unable to have all of our students who need those alternative placements to actually have the services provided to them. You will also see that there's a teacher of the blind and visually impaired under this contract, along with other services that we're able to utilize. So it is it's a good partnership with CISA 1. I think Ms. Munfeld did a great job in identifying that CISA 1 will have a new executive director starting July 1st, and Sue Doyle. You had a chance to meet Ms. Doyle when she went over the findings of the audit of the Special Education and Student Services report a few months ago.
Thank you, Dr. Means. Board members? Questions? I'll also offer one point. The last speaker, CISA 1 may be able to help us in this area. I know that there is a program for work at the Milwaukee County Zoo, and there may be other business partnerships as well. So that concludes that report.
And then, yes, moving to 10B, Infinite Campus is our student information system that we utilize in the district. This is an annual renewal of that program. If you remember a few years ago, the district moved from Power School to Infinite Campus, and we're finding that Infinite Campus works well for us. We are very lucky in having Lisa Winters. She's an amazing resource for the district and understands Infinite Campus very well. I think there's a lot of components, and Dr. Mervo and I have had this conversation. There are elements and components of Infinite Campus that we still are learning and will give us the ability to give you even more data and insight on how our students are doing. But the first step is to renew the actual agreement with Infinite Campus. That's what the agenda item of 10B represents.
Thank you. Any board member questions or comment? Seeing none. Thank you. We will see these contracts then on our next agenda for approval.
Yes.
And is there any community comment on the pupil and family support items? I see none in the room. Any online?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Right now we'll take final public comment on items on the agenda or items not on the agenda. Oh, yes, we have one in the room.
Hi, this is Julie Alexander, 7224 West State Street, Unit 1A in Wauwatosa. And I got a couple of comments here. First off, I want to applaud the board for actually looking at ADA accessibility issues as we're looking at some of the money that needs to is in a fund to improve the school district, and it'd be great. It's great use to really be looking at some of those things here. Second, I just thought I'd mention that today at work, I actually looked into translation agreement type issues and found out just on average that translators for written translation, their fees about $50 an hour. So, and then basically, that's an average. That I mean, they can go up or lower than that. And then also, basically, you look at, what they're charging. It's for about 240 unit type things. So basically, that's sort of where that is. And translation is expensive. And for Independence First, when we translated to another, to like his Spanish, it cost about $6,000 for us to do that. So I just wanted to give you that. It's just a comment in terms of how translation costs sort of run. So I just wanted to mention that as well. And my third comment is I am in support of what BJ and Deb Paul-Pellet said in terms of really looking at trying to find some more business partnerships through the Career Act or any other option so that we can try and come up with some more ideas and more options for our people with disabilities to actually get some on-the-job training before they graduate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander.
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit with regards to the translation. I was told long ago in law school by an international contract lawyer that a way to check on your translator is to get the translation and then have another translator translate it back to the original language. And then you can hold up the two originals. Not to do it all the time, but in our situation, but to spot check for quality. Don't have the same people translate it back, but have another agency translate it back to the English. And now you read the two English versions and see if we're actually losing anything in translation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
Hi, BJ Ermans, 2749 North 75th Street. And thank you for all of the excellent discussion and points and presentations. One thing I would like to point out is that when we have presenters who speak very, very fast, the auto captioning has to really go fast. And sometimes this is a fault of the system, not anybody else's. But I just wanted to mention if people could sometimes speak a little more slowly, because what Zoom will do is that they will really fly the words across the screen and then go on to the next one. And it's not there, which is feedback we've given to Zoom. But the other thing is congratulations that we have wonderful graduations and terrific graduates. I would like to ask that we look at public and highly visible events like that as an opportunity to show how inclusive we are, such as adopting and adapting universal design principles where we would have all ramps going up to and off of the stage so that every student follows the exact same pattern and does not feel left out by having to go to the one ramp at one side of the stage. I figured this is a good time. There's plenty of time to think about it for next year. And the additional $1.2 million of ESSER funds that I know in talking to Greg about his great ideas for accessibility, that they are going to be thinking pretty quickly about some specific needs for meeting and exceeding ADA requirements that are going to need some new equipment and things. And he'll come up with those, I think, pretty quickly, that maybe we could use some of that $1.2 million for that as well. And that was it, but thank you for the thought that you put into all of your service.
Thank you. Is there any other comment? Okay, seeing none. Yes, and I sincerely appreciate the staff staying, the community members staying. It was quite an intense agenda again this evening. Thank you, board members. A motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. Would you call the roll, Ms. Newman?
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Dr. Hoig?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Mufeld?
Yes, we are adjourned at 11 p.m.